Hey everyone, Peter here. I don't know what time you're watching this video, but close your eyes and just listen to these scary stories and fall asleep. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching this video right now. My name is Ethan Palmer, and I used to be a forest ranger. 7 years protecting Olympic National Park's wilderness taught me to read signs others miss. Broken twigs that whisper of passage, animal tracks that tell stories, the subtle wrongness when nature holds its breath. I thought I'd left that world behind when I quit the service 2 years ago, but some skills never fade, some instincts never sleep. The call came at 5:47 a.m. on a grey October morning. Detective Sarah Chen's voice cut through my coffee-hazed thoughts with surgical precision. "We need you, Ethan. 2 hikers, the Hendersons, missed their check-in yesterday. Their car's still at the Hoh River trailhead. No one else knows these mountains like you do." I should have said no. Should have reminded her I wasn't a ranger anymore, that there were protocols, other people. But something in her voice, a tightness I'd heard before when cases went wrong, made me reach for my jacket. "I'll be there in an hour." The drive to Olympic National Park felt like stepping backward through time. Every curve of Highway 101 brought back memories. Rescue operations, lost tourists, the occasional body recovery. As I pulled into the familiar gravel lot at the Hoh River trailhead, autumn mist clung to the towering Sitka spruces like ghostly fingers. Chen was waiting by a red Subaru Outback, her breath visible in the morning chill. Beside her stood a younger man I didn't recognize, probably new to the detective bureau. "Thanks for coming," she said, extending a steaming thermos. Tom and Linda Henderson, both 34, experienced hikers from Portland. They planned a 3-day loop on the Hoh River Trail. Should have been back yesterday evening. I walked around their vehicle, noting the details automatically. No signs of struggle. Doors locked. A small pile of gear visible through the rear window. Extra clothes, probably items they'd decided were unnecessary weight. "Weather's been mild," I said, checking my watch. It was 7:15 a.m. "If they're just running late." "Their daughter called this morning," Chen interrupted. "They were supposed to pick her up from a sleepover last night. Tom Henderson's a software engineer, meticulous planner, always early. This isn't like them." I shouldered my pack, feeling the familiar weight of emergency supplies I still kept prepared out of habit. Water purification tablets, emergency beacon, first aid kit, rope, knife. The tools of someone who'd spent too many years pulling people out of situations they'd never expected to face. "I'll follow their planned route. They filed a permit." Chen handed me a folded paper. "Standard Hoh River loop. Up the river trail to Olympus Guard Station, then back via the Bogachiel. 3 days, 2 nights. As we talked, something nagged at the edge of my consciousness. I'd learned to trust these feelings during my ranger years, the subtle wrongness that preceded most serious incidents. The forest felt different this morning, too quiet. Even the river seemed muted. I started up the trail at 7:30 a.m., my boots finding the familiar rhythm on packed earth and fallen leaves. The Hoh River Trail was one of my old beats, a path I could walk blindfolded. Massive western hemlocks and Douglas firs created a cathedral ceiling above, filtering the weak autumn sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. The first anomaly appeared 45 minutes in. I almost missed it. Would have, if not for years of training my eyes to catch the unnatural among nature's chaos. A footprint in a patch of soft earth beside the trail, clear enough to show tread pattern. Size 11 hiking boot, recent enough that morning dew hadn't settled in the depression. But the print faced the wrong direction. I knelt beside it, my hands automatically framing the track while my mind processed what I was seeing. The Hendersons' permit showed they'd started their hike 2 days ago. This print was maybe 6 hours old, based on the crisp edges and lack of moisture accumulation. Someone had walked this way in the early morning hours, heading back toward the trailhead while it was still dark. That alone wasn't unusual. Hikers sometimes started early or took different routes, but something about the deliberate placement nagged at me. The print sat perfectly centered in the only patch of soft earth for 50 yards in either direction, almost like it had been left intentionally. I photographed it with my phone and continued hiking, my senses now fully engaged. Every broken branch, every disturbed stone, every bird call received my attention. The forest began revealing its secrets the way it always had, gradually to those who knew how to look. A mile further, I found the second anomaly. Fresh blazes on a Douglas fir, carved deep enough to show white wood beneath the bark. 3 parallel lines, each about 4 inches long. Too deliberate for animal damage, too fresh for normal trail marking. I'd seen similar markings during drug interdiction operations, signals used by smugglers to mark routes and caches. My hand moved instinctively to the emergency beacon clipped to my belt. But I hesitated. What would I report? A footprint and some tree scratches? Chen would think I was seeing phantoms. The third discovery came 20 minutes later and erased any doubt that something was wrong. A piece of orange fabric caught on a salmonberry bush 15 feet off the main trail. Orange was a popular color for hiking gear. Safety-conscious hikers wore it to remain visible. But this scrap was positioned at exactly eye level, tied to the bush rather than snagged naturally. I approached carefully, studying the ground around the bush. No signs of struggle, no other footprints. Someone had placed this marker deliberately, then covered their tracks with practiced skill. The fabric was high-quality nylon, the kind used in expensive outdoor gear. A small triangle, maybe 2 inches at the widest point, with a clean edge that suggested it had been cut rather than torn. No fading, no weathering, fresh. My ranger instincts, dormant for 2 years, roared back to life. This wasn't a rescue situation anymore. Someone was playing games in my forest. I activated my phone's GPS and marked the location, then continued up the trail with heightened awareness. The morning fog was lifting, revealing patches of blue sky between the canopy, but the temperature seemed to drop with each step. By 10 a.m., I could see my breath. The fourth anomaly stopped me cold. Footprints in a small clearing beside Mineral Creek, about 2.5 miles from the trailhead. But not random hiking prints. These were arranged in a perfect circle, 12 sets of boot impressions in the soft earth beside the water. Different sizes, different tread patterns. Some were definitely from women's boots, others clearly men's. 12 people had stood in this circle recently. Very recently. I knelt in the center of the circle, my mind racing. 12 hikers traveling together would require permits for a large group. Chen hadn't mentioned any other missing persons, and what kind of hiking group arranged themselves in a perfect circle? That's when I noticed the 13th set of prints. These led away from the circle toward a massive fallen cedar that created a natural bridge across the creek. The prints were deeper than the others, suggesting someone carrying extra weight. I followed them carefully, my hand now resting on the bear spray attached to my belt. The tracks led to the fallen cedar, then stopped. No prints on the log itself, no continuation on the far side of the creek. It was as if someone had simply vanished. I was examining the last clear footprint when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My skin prickled with the primitive awareness that had kept humans alive for millennia. Somewhere in the dense forest around this clearing, eyes were fixed on me. I forced myself to remain still, crouched beside the fallen log, while my peripheral vision searched for movement. Nothing. But the feeling persisted, stronger now. Whoever was watching had excellent concealment skills and infinite patience. They'd been observing me for several minutes, maybe longer. I stood slowly, casually, as if I'd found nothing interesting. Then I did something that had saved my life twice during ranger incidents. I spoke directly to my unseen observer. "Interesting track pattern," I said conversationally, my voice carrying clearly in the still air. 12 people in a circle. Almost ritualistic. Silence. But the watching sensation intensified. Of course, the 13th set tells the real story, I continued, moving away from the creek with deliberate calm. Someone directing the others. Someone in charge. A branch snapped somewhere behind me. Soft, almost inaudible, but definitely human-caused. My watcher was repositioning. I'd played this game before with poachers and drug runners. The key was to demonstrate awareness without triggering confrontation. Show respect for your opponent's skills while making it clear you weren't easy prey. "Nice choice of location," I added, pausing to examine a tree for more blazes. Mineral Creek Crossing is isolated enough for privacy, but still accessible. Good tactical thinking. This time the response was deliberate. A single stone tossed into the creek with mathematical precision. Not a threat, but acknowledgement. My watcher wanted me to know he was there. Game on. I resumed hiking, but everything had changed. This wasn't a search and rescue anymore. Someone was testing me, evaluating my abilities, leading me deeper into the forest for purposes I couldn't yet understand. The trail wound steadily upward through increasingly dense forest. Ancient cedars and hemlocks blocked most direct sunlight, creating a twilight world of shadows and filtered light. Perfect concealment for someone who knew how to use it. More markers appeared as I climbed, stones arranged in small cairns just off the trail, bent branches pointing in specific directions, small notches carved into tree bark. Someone was laying breadcrumbs, guiding me along a predetermined route. By noon, I'd reached the junction where the Hoh River Trail split toward Olympus Guard Station. According to the Hendersons' permit, they should have taken the left fork toward their first campsite. But the markers I'd been following pointed right, toward a seldom-used spur trail that led to an abandoned mining camp. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected in this terrain, but I had GPS coordinates for every marker I'd found. If I didn't return, Chen would eventually follow my route. The spur trail hadn't been maintained in years. Fallen logs blocked the path at regular intervals, and salmonberry bushes encroached from both sides. It would be slow going for most hikers. But the mysterious markers continued, always just visible enough to follow. 300 yards up the spur trail, I found evidence that chilled my blood. A small clearing had been artificially expanded, with fresh cuts on several trees. Drag marks in the soft earth suggested heavy objects had been moved recently, and scattered around the clearing's perimeter were personal items. A torn piece of flannel shirt, a broken shoelace, a small silver earring. The Hendersons had been here, recently. I photographed everything, then examined the drag marks more carefully. The pattern suggested multiple people being moved while unconscious or restrained. The marks led away from the clearing on what appeared to be a game trail, barely visible through the undergrowth. That's when I found the note. It was tucked under a stone at the exact center of the clearing, positioned where anyone with tracking skills would eventually look. Written on waterproof paper in neat block letters, Ranger Palmer, your reputation exceeds reality. The Hendersons are safe for now. Continue to the mining camp if you wish to understand. Come alone. You are being evaluated. MV. The signature meant nothing to me, but the message was clear. Someone knew exactly who I was and had been planning this encounter. The Hendersons weren't random victims. They were bait to draw me into the forest. I folded the note carefully and continued up the trail, every sense hyper-alert. The abandoned mining camp was still 2 miles away, but whoever MV was, he demonstrated sophisticated planning and intimate knowledge of both the terrain and my background. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when I reached the old camp. What remained of the mining operation consisted of a few collapsed buildings, rusted equipment, and several large excavated areas now filled with stagnant water. It had been abandoned since the 1940s, gradually reclaimed by the forest. But someone had been busy here recently. Fresh lumber had been used to repair one of the buildings, a small structure that might have been the foreman's office. New hinges gleamed on the door, and I could see light leaking around the frame. Someone was home. I approached carefully, noting fresh tire tracks leading to a concealed vehicle about 50 yards from the main building. The tracks were from a large truck or van with heavy-duty tires designed for off-road use. "Come in, Ranger Palmer," a voice called from inside the building before I could knock. The doors unlocked. The voice was educated, calm, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Eastern European, maybe Russian. Whoever MV was, he'd been expecting me. I pushed open the door and stepped into a space that defied all expectations. The interior had been completely renovated into a sophisticated command center. Banks of monitors showed feeds from hidden cameras positioned throughout the forest. Computer equipment hummed quietly on custom-built desks. Maps covered one wall, marked with routes and coordinates. This wasn't a temporary camp, it was a permanent operation. And sitting behind the largest desk, studying me with the intense focus of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen, was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes. Markus Volkov, he said, standing to extend his hand. Former Russian military logistics, current entrepreneur. Please sit. We have much to discuss. I remained standing, my hand near the bear spray. Where are the Hendersons? Safe, he replied, settling back into his chair. Uncomfortable perhaps, but unharmed. They're currently in a secure location about 8 miles from here, awaiting the outcome of our conversation. The monitors showed various forest locations, but I couldn't identify any that might contain captives. Volkov noticed my attention. Impressive setup, I admitted. How long have you been operating here? 2 years, he said with obvious pride. This location provides excellent access to multiple trail systems while remaining completely isolated. Perfect for my business requirements. Which are? Volkov leaned forward, his eyes lighting with evangelical fervor. I solve problems, Ranger Palmer. Society has many inefficiencies, people who contribute nothing, consume resources, burden the system. I relocate these individuals to places where their potential can be properly utilized. The euphemisms clicked into place with horrible clarity. Human trafficking. Such an ugly term, he said with distaste. I prefer human resource optimization. There are markets for various types of people. Young, healthy individuals for physical labor, older professionals for specialized knowledge, attractive specimens for entertainment purposes. I simply match supply with demand. I felt sick. The Hendersons aren't your usual targets. No, he agreed. They're what you might call quality control. You see, most of my acquisitions are society's forgotten. Homeless individuals, addicts, illegal immigrants, people who won't be missed. But occasionally, I need to test my systems with more challenging subjects. More challenging how? Volkov stood and moved to one of the maps, pointing to marked routes through the forest. The Hendersons represent middle-class hikers with families, jobs, social connections. Taking them successfully demonstrates the sophistication of my operation. If I can make experienced hikers disappear without a trace, I can take anyone. And what does this have to do with me? He turned back with a smile that chilled my blood. You, Ranger Palmer, are the ultimate test. Your skills are legendary among Park Service personnel. 7 years protecting these mountains, dozens of successful rescues, an intuitive understanding of the wilderness that borders on supernatural. If I can neutralize you, it proves my methods are foolproof. The pieces fell into place. You've been planning this for months. Longer, he confirmed. I've been studying your patterns, your cases, your techniques. The camera system you admired extends throughout 50 square miles of forest. I've watched you work, learned your methods, identified your strengths and weaknesses. And the markers I followed? A test of your abilities. I needed to confirm that your reputation was deserved, that you could follow subtle signs and make logical deductions. You exceeded my expectations. I moved closer to the desk, noting the positions of the computer equipment and the single exit. So, what happens now? Now you have a choice, Volkov said, opening a desk drawer. You can attempt to rescue the Hendersons and apprehend me, knowing that failure means their deaths and your own. Or you can walk away, report them as lost hikers who likely fell into a ravine and continue your quiet civilian life. That's not much of a choice. Perhaps not, but it's more consideration than most of my acquisitions receive. He pulled a pistol from the drawer, placing it casually on the desk. I respect your abilities, Ranger Palmer. In another life, we might have been colleagues. I studied the weapon, a professional's tool, well-maintained and positioned for quick access. But Volkov's body language suggested confidence rather than immediate threat. He wanted to talk, to explain his methodology, classic narcissistic behavior. Tell me about your first acquisition, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. How did you get started in human resource optimization? His eyes lit up. Few things pleased a psychopath more than an intelligent audience for their genius. Moscow, 2014, he began. I was handling logistics for a construction consortium when the sanctions hit. My company collapsed overnight, taking my life savings and pension. I found myself sleeping in metro stations with the homeless. He paused, lost in the memory. One night, I watched city workers clear a camp under the Sokolnicheskaya line. Dozens of people swept away like refuse, and I realized these individuals had value, not to society perhaps, but to certain markets that don't ask questions about documentation. So you started small. A few homeless men, sold to a construction company in Kazakhstan. The profit margin was extraordinary and the risk minimal. Who investigates the disappearance of people who were already invisible? The calculation in his voice was more disturbing than any emotional outburst. This wasn't a crime of passion, but a business model refined over years. But you got ambitious, I prompted. Success breeds expansion, he agreed. I developed routes through Eastern Europe, established reliable transportation networks, identified new markets. When political situations became complicated in Russia, I relocated operations to America. Why Olympic National Park? Geography, he said simply. Isolated wilderness areas adjacent to major population centers. Seattle provides excellent supply, while the forest offers perfect concealment and multiple escape routes. Plus, your national parks have such tragically inadequate security. I absorbed this information while scanning the room for advantages. The monitors showed that evening shadows were lengthening outside. Darkness would bring both opportunity and danger. How many people? I asked. Here, perhaps 40 over 2 years. Nationwide, my network processes several hundred annually. It's quite efficient, really. The casual admission of mass kidnapping made my stomach clench. 40 families destroyed, 40 lives stolen, all for profit margins and logistical efficiency. The Hendersons, I said. Why them specifically? Research, Volkov replied. I study missing person reports, identify patterns that might expose my operations. Tom Henderson's background in software engineering caught my attention. He developed search algorithms for law enforcement databases. His disappearance tests whether my methods can fool his own technology. And Linda? Collateral. Though she's proven quite resourceful during captivity, strong survival instincts, she'll bring premium pricing in the right market. The matter-of-fact discussion of selling human beings like livestock required every ounce of self-control I possessed. But Volkov's narcissism was providing crucial intelligence. Keep him talking, learn the system, identify weaknesses. Where are you moving them? I asked. He gestured toward one of the maps. Vancouver, initially. I have excellent contacts in the Pacific shipping industry. From there, various international destinations depending on specific market demands. When? Tonight, actually. The Henderson pickup was scheduled for 10 p.m., which provides another element of pressure in our current situation. He checked his watch. You have approximately 4 hours to make your decision. What exactly are you proposing? Volkov leaned forward intently. A test of skills, Ranger Palmer. You have 4 hours to locate and free the Hendersons. If you succeed, you may attempt to apprehend me. But if you fail, or if you try to involve outside assistance, they die immediately and their bodies disappear forever. And you? I monitor everything through the camera network. No intervention, just observation. A pure test of your wilderness skills against my logistical planning. It was an insane proposition, clearly rigged in his favor. But it was also the only chance the Hendersons had. Why offer this at all? I asked. Why not just eliminate all of us and continue your operations? Professional curiosity, he admitted. I've spent 2 years studying your methods. I want to see them tested against a worthy opponent. Consider it research for future operational improvements. The hubris was staggering. He was so confident in his systems that he was willing to risk everything for intellectual satisfaction. I'll need my equipment, I said. Of course. Though I should mention that several items in your pack have been modified during your journey here today. I checked my gear. The emergency beacon had been disabled, its internal components carefully removed. My knife blade showed signs of deliberate dulling. Small sabotages designed to level the playing field. Impressive fieldwork, I admitted. I've learned much from watching your techniques, he said proudly. Though I suspect you've retained certain advantages I haven't anticipated. He was right. Volkov understood my equipment and standard procedures, but he couldn't account for years of intuitive forest knowledge and the accumulated wisdom of dozens of emergency situations. Time begins now, he announced, checking his watch. The Hendersons are 8 miles northeast of this location, held in a concealed structure. Good hunting, Ranger Palmer. I stood to leave, then paused. One question. What happens if I win? If you successfully rescue the Hendersons and return here within 4 hours, I'll surrender peacefully and provide information about my entire network. His smile was cold. But if you fail, I disappear tonight, and this operation relocates to a different region. Either way, you'll never see me again. I headed for the door, then stopped as another thought occurred to me. Volkov, what made you think I'd play this game at all? Most people would have called for backup the moment they found your note. Because, he said quietly, you're not most people. You're a guardian who can't resist protecting the innocent even when the odds are impossible. It's both your greatest strength and your fatal weakness. The observation hit closer to home than I cared to admit. I'd always been drawn to the hardest cases, the most desperate situations. It's what made me a good ranger, and apparently what made me predictable to a predator like Volkov. 4 hours, I said, and stepped into the gathering darkness. The temperature had dropped dramatically while I was inside, and my breath formed visible clouds in the crisp mountain air. According to my watch, it was 6:15 p.m. Sunset would come early in the forest, giving me perhaps 90 minutes of usable daylight. Northeast of the mining camp meant climbing toward the higher elevations, into terrain that was even more isolated and difficult to navigate. Volkov had chosen his prison location well, far enough from any trail to discourage accidental discovery, but accessible enough for his purposes. I began moving immediately, using techniques I'd developed during years of night rescues. Short, rapid progress during full visibility, then careful navigation using natural landmarks when darkness fell. The forest revealed its secrets gradually to those who knew how to read them. Broken branches and disturbed earth told stories of recent passage. The faint chemical smell of vehicle exhaust led me to a hidden access road, probably used to transport the Hendersons to their prison. Following the road would be faster, but it also meant exposure to anyone monitoring my progress. I chose a parallel route through dense timber, using the road's direction as a guide while maintaining concealment. As darkness deepened, my other senses compensated for reduced vision. The forest sounds told me where I was, the splash of a small creek, the specific echo patterns of rock faces, the subtle difference in wind patterns around clearings. After an hour of steady climbing, I found the structure. It sat in a small clearing about 50 yards off the crude access road, a prefabricated metal building, probably constructed in sections and assembled on site. No windows. Heavy door with multiple locks and a small generator providing power. Professional construction designed for security and concealment. I approached carefully, studying the surrounding area for cameras or sensors. Volkov's monitoring network was extensive, but it couldn't cover everything. I found 2 camera positions and adjusted my route to avoid their fields of view. The building's ventilation system included several small vents near the roofline. By positioning myself against the back wall, I could hear faint sounds from inside. Voices, movement, someone coughing. "Tom? Linda?" I called softly near one of the vents. Immediate response. Scrambling sounds, urgent whispers, then Tom Henderson's voice. "Who's there?" "Ethan Palmer, former park ranger. Detective Chen sent me to find you." "Thank God," Linda's voice shaky with relief. "We've been here for 2 days. There's a man—" "I know about Volkov," I interrupted. "Are you injured?" "Bruised, dehydrated, but we can walk," Tom replied. "The door has multiple locks, electronic and mechanical." I examined the entrance more carefully. Volkov hadn't exaggerated his security measures. The door featured 3 separate locking mechanisms, including what appeared to be a sophisticated electronic lock, requiring either a key code or remote activation. But every security system had weaknesses, and Volkov's confidence might have led to operational oversights. The building's prefabricated construction meant modular assembly, with sections bolted together rather than welded. I examined the joints between wall panels, looking for access points. The 3rd panel from the door showed promising stress marks around the bolt heads. Someone had disassembled and reassembled this section, probably during construction. The bolts were accessible from outside, and I still had my multi-tool despite Volkov's sabotage. Working by feel in the darkness, I began removing bolts. The multi-tools bits had been subtly damaged, making the work slow and difficult, but the bolts gradually loosened. 20 minutes later, I'd created a gap large enough for the Hendersons to squeeze through. "Can you travel?" I asked as they emerged into the night air. "Yes," Tom said immediately. "Whatever it takes to get away from here." Linda nodded agreement, though she moved stiffly. "He kept talking about selling us to someone in Vancouver tonight." "We need to move fast," I said, checking my watch. 2 hours and 15 minutes remaining. "Can you follow me in darkness?" "We'll manage," Linda replied with determination that reminded me why experienced hikers survived when others didn't. I led them away from the building at an angle that avoided the known camera positions, moving as quickly as safety allowed through the dark forest. Our route took us away from the access road, into terrain that would be nearly impossible to follow with vehicles. We'd covered perhaps half a mile when the lights appeared behind us. Vehicle headlights, moving fast along the access road toward the prison building. Volkov had discovered the escape, either through his monitoring system or a scheduled check-in. "Down," I whispered, and we dropped behind a massive fallen cedar. The lights stopped at the building, then began moving in systematic patterns, a search grid using multiple vehicles. Spotlights swept the forest randomly, but the searchers were guessing our direction. "He has help," Tom observed quietly. "At least 3 vehicles," I agreed, counting the separate light patterns, but they're searching the wrong area. We waited until the lights moved further away, then continued our escape route. But the game had changed. Volkov wasn't just observing anymore, he was actively hunting. The terrain began descending toward the original trail system, offering better concealment, but also more difficult navigation. I led the Hendersons through growth so dense we had to crawl in places, but it provided perfect cover from both vehicles and aerial observation. An hour and a half into our escape, we reached familiar ground, the junction where the Hoh River Trail split toward the abandoned mining camp. We were still 4 miles from the trailhead in safety, but at least we were back on marked trails. That's when I heard the dogs. Distant baying echoed through the forest, growing closer. Volkov had brought tracking animals, probably bloodhounds trained for human scent. Our lead time was evaporating rapidly. "We need to confuse the trail," I told the Hendersons. "Follow me exactly, step where I step." I led them into Mineral Creek, the same water crossing where I'd first felt Volkov's observation. Moving upstream in the shallow water would break our scent trail temporarily, buying precious time. The creek was shockingly cold, and both Hendersons struggled with the slippery rocks, but they maintained pace without complaint. We followed the water for nearly half a mile before emerging on the far bank. Behind us, the dog sounds had stopped. They'd lost the scent at the water crossing, but it would only delay them, not stop them. "How much further?" Linda asked, breathing hard from the cold and exertion. 3 miles to the trailhead," I replied. "But there's a problem." I explained about Volkov's monitoring network and the probability that the main trail was under surveillance. Reaching safety meant either avoiding his cameras entirely or moving so fast that he couldn't intercept us. "There's a third option," Tom said thoughtfully. "What if we split up? Make them choose between multiple targets?" It was tactically sound but emotionally difficult. After years of ranger rescues, leaving civilians to fend for themselves violated every instinct I possessed. "I know these mountains better than anyone," I said finally. "I should draw their pursuit while you two take the main trail to safety." "No," Linda said firmly. "We stay together. If we're going to make it out, we do it as a team." The conviction in her voice reminded me why some people survived impossible situations while others didn't. Fear could paralyze or motivate. The Hendersons had chosen motivation. "Then we move fast and stay alert," I decided. "Single file, minimal noise, no lights." We rejoined the main trail and began the final push toward safety. My watch showed 9:20 p.m., 40 minutes until Volkov's deadline. Even if we reached the trailhead, there was no guarantee Chen would still be waiting, or that Volkov couldn't intercept us in the parking area. The trail descended steadily through familiar forest, past landmarks I'd known for years. Under normal circumstances, it would be a pleasant evening hike, but every shadow could conceal an ambush, every sound might signal pursuit. We'd covered 2 miles when the trap revealed itself. Artificial lights blazed suddenly ahead, flooding the trail with harsh illumination. Vehicle engines roared to life, and armed figures emerged from concealment on both sides of the path. "End of the line," Volkov's voice called from somewhere behind the lights. An admirable effort, Ranger Palmer, but ultimately futile. I counted at least 6 figures, all carrying weapons, positioned to cover every escape route. Volkov had anticipated our destination and prepared accordingly. "The Hendersons go free," I called back. "That was the agreement." "The agreement was that you had 4 hours to rescue them and return to the mining camp," Volkov replied. "You've succeeded in the rescue but failed to complete the challenge." He stepped into the light, flanked by 2 armed men who moved with military precision. This wasn't a civilian trafficking operation, it was a paramilitary organization with sophisticated resources. "However," he continued, "I'm prepared to honor the spirit of our arrangement. The Hendersons may leave unharmed. You, however, have become too great a liability to release." "Let them go first," I demanded. Volkov nodded to one of his men, who gestured with his weapon toward the trail leading to the parking area. "Walk that direction," he told the Hendersons. "Don't look back. Don't deviate from the path." Tom and Linda hesitated, clearly reluctant to abandon me. "Go," I told them. "This ends here." They began walking towards safety, and I watched until they disappeared into the darkness beyond the lights. Whatever happened next, the rescue was complete. "Now what?" I asked Volkov. "Now you disappear," he said simply. "A tragic accident during an unauthorized rescue attempt. Your body will never be found, and the official record will show that you died heroically trying to save the Hendersons. Except the Hendersons know the truth. The Hendersons will report that they escaped on their own after being held by unknown criminals who were never apprehended. Trauma often affects memory, and missing persons cases are rarely investigated thoroughly when the victims return safely." It was a rational plan, probably refined through previous experiences. Volkov thought of everything except the one variable he couldn't control, my intimate knowledge of this specific terrain. I'd been retreating slowly during our conversation, positioning myself near a feature I'd noticed earlier, a steep drop-off just beyond the edge of the lights. The slope led down to a ravine I'd used during training exercises years ago. "Any last words?" Volkov asked, raising his own weapon. "Yeah," I said, and threw myself backward into the darkness. The slope was steeper than I'd remembered, and I tumbled through brush and small trees in a barely controlled fall. Behind me, shouts erupted as Volkov's men tried to follow with their lights. I hit the bottom of the ravine hard, rolling to absorb impact, then immediately began moving upstream. The narrow canyon provided perfect concealment, and I knew it led back toward the river trail about half a mile below our previous position. Flashlight beams swept the ravine mouth, but the searchers couldn't see more than a few yards into the dense undergrowth. I heard Volkov shouting orders, organizing a systematic search, but I already had a crucial head start. The ravine exit brought me back to familiar territory, the same section of trail where I'd first detected signs of Volkov's operation. But now, I had advantages he couldn't anticipate: complete darkness, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and the desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. I worked my way back toward the mining camp, moving through forest so dense that vehicles couldn't follow. Volkov would expect me to flee toward civilization, not return to his base of operations. The abandoned camp was dark when I arrived, but Volkov's command center still showed signs of recent occupation. Computer monitors displayed camera feeds from throughout the forest, including several that showed his men searching for me near the trail. I had perhaps 30 minutes before he returned, enough time to gather intelligence and call for backup if I could restore communications. The computer system was sophisticated, but not impregnable. Years of working with Park Service technology had taught me basic network principles, and Volkov's confidence had led to sloppy security practices. I found his operational files within minutes, maps showing the entire trafficking network, contact information for buyers and transporters, financial records documenting hundreds of transactions, everything needed to dismantle the organization. I also found something more immediately useful: the control codes for his camera network. The system included not just surveillance but also communication relays, to extend cell phone coverage throughout his operational area. I activated an emergency override that sent a distress signal to park service frequency, then uploaded all of Volkov's files to cloud storage using his own network. The response was immediate, Chen's voice crackling through the communication system. "Ethan, where are you? The Hendersons made it out and told us everything." "Mining camp," I replied quickly. "Volkov's returning soon. I have his complete files, but I need backup immediately." "ETA 20 minutes, she responded. "Federal agents are already en route." I shut down the system and prepared for Volkov's return. He'd lost his hostages, his operational security was compromised, and law enforcement was closing in. A man like him would have contingency plans, but desperation might force tactical errors. The vehicles returned 15 minutes later, earlier than expected. Volkov had abandoned the search to secure his base, probably planning immediate evacuation. He entered the command center alone, weapon drawn, scanning for threats. When he saw me sitting calmly at his computer station, his face showed genuine surprise for the first time. "Ranger Palmer, I admit I didn't anticipate this development." "You said it yourself," I replied. "My greatest strength and fatal weakness, I can't resist protecting the innocent." "But the Hendersons are safe. Your mission is complete." I gestured toward the computer screens, now showing federal agents moving through the forest from multiple directions. 40 people over 2 years, hundreds more through your network. My mission expanded. Volkov studied the tactical display with professional interest rather than panic. "Impressive improvisation, though I notice you're sitting in a location with no exit routes." "Sometimes the best defense is no defense at all," I said. "Complete commitment to the mission." He raised his weapon, but hesitated as the sound of helicopters became audible in the distance. "You're willing to die to stop me?" "If necessary, but I don't think you'll shoot." "Why not?" "Because you're curious how this ends. You respect the opponent more than you fear the consequences." Volkov lowered his weapon slightly, a smile creasing his features. "You understand me remarkably well. I've had good teachers, 7 years of dealing with people in crisis situations. You learn to read motivations, predict behavior patterns. And what do you predict now? You surrender peacefully, provide complete cooperation, and spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Unless you prefer a shootout with overwhelming federal forces." The helicopter sounds were closer now, joined by vehicle engines from multiple directions. Volkov's organization was finished, and he knew it. "An interesting proposition," he said, setting his weapon on the desk. "Though I should point out that my network extends far beyond this operation. Arresting me creates a vacancy, not a solution. Every network has weaknesses. Every organization depends on key individuals. You've been studying me for months. I've been studying you for hours. The difference is I learned what I needed to know." Volkov raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That you're not really evil. You're broken. The Moscow collapse, losing everything, being discarded by society. It destroyed your faith in human value. This isn't about profit. It's about proving that people are commodities, that human connections are illusions." His face hardened. "You're wrong." "Am I? 40 people processed locally, but how many have you actually seen sold? How many transactions have you personally completed?" The question hit home. Volkov's operation was elaborate theater, designed to convince himself that his philosophical theories were correct. But the logistics suggested something different. A man who'd created a system to justify his worldview while avoiding its ultimate implementation. "The families of your victims deserve justice," I continued, "but you deserve the chance to rebuild whatever humanity you have left. Cooperation now means the possibility of redemption later." Floodlights suddenly illuminated the building as federal agents surrounded the camp. Chen's voice echoed through a bullhorn. "This is FBI. Exit the building with hands visible." Volkov looked around his command center one final time, then met my eyes. "You realize this conversation has been recorded by my security system?" "I was hoping it would be. Evidence of your cooperation will matter during sentencing." He laughed, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. "Ranger Palmer, you continue to surprise me." "Very well. I surrender to your custody pending federal processing." We walked outside together, hands raised, as agents took control of the situation. As we were separated for individual processing, Volkov called back. "Our conversation isn't finished. I'll want to understand how you identified my psychological profile so accurately." "Visit me sometime," I replied. "I'll explain it over coffee." The next few hours blurred together. Debriefings, evidence documentation, medical examinations for myself and the Hendersons. By dawn, the full scope of Volkov's operation was becoming clear. His files revealed a network spanning multiple states with connections to international trafficking organizations. Chen found me sitting by the Ho River as sunrise filtered through the forest canopy, watching the water flow toward the Pacific and contemplating the night's events. "The Hendersons want to thank you personally," she said, settling beside me on a fallen log. "They don't need to. They showed remarkable courage throughout the ordeal." "Volkov's been talking. Says he wants to provide complete cooperation in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Federal prosecutors are interested." I nodded. "He's not what he appeared to be. Dangerous, yes, but not irredeemable." "You really think he can be rehabilitated?" "I think everyone deserves the chance to try. See, even predators like Volkov were human beings before trauma, and bad choices transformed them." Chen studied my face carefully. "You okay? Really?" I considered the question seriously. 7 years as a ranger had prepared me for physical dangers and routine emergencies, but nothing had prepared me for the psychological complexity of someone like Volkov. Evil that thought of itself as philosophical necessity, cruelty rationalized as research. "I'm different," I said finally. "This changes how I understand human nature. But yeah, I'm okay. The Park Service wants you back. Full reinstatement, commendation for exceptional service, your choice of assignments." "I'll think about it." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the forest wake up around us. Somewhere in this wilderness, families would soon be reunited with loved ones who'd been given up for lost. Volkov's network would be dismantled, his victims freed and returned home. But I knew there would be others like him, predators who used intelligence and planning to rationalize the destruction of human lives. The forest would always contain dangers, both natural and human. The difference was that now I understood something I'd missed during my ranger years. The most dangerous predators weren't the obviously vicious ones. They were the ones who convinced themselves they were something other than predators. "My name is Ethan Palmer, and I used to be a forest ranger. After confronting Marcus Volkov in the depths of Olympic National Park, I learned that some of the most important rescues happen not in the wilderness, but in the dark places of the human heart, where people lose their way and need someone to guide them back to who they used to be. The forest taught me to read signs others miss, to track what seems impossible to follow, to find the lost and bring them home. But it took facing a human predator to understand that the most valuable tracking skill isn't finding footprints in the earth. It's finding the remaining traces of humanity in people who've lost themselves to trauma and pain. That's a kind of search and rescue that never ends, and it's more important than any trail I've ever followed through the wilderness." My name is Dan Rivers, and I spent 7 years as a forest ranger in Yellowstone before I learned that some things in the wilderness hunt back. The call came at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October. I'd been sleeping poorly since leaving the service, not the military kind, the park kind, and was already nursing my second cup of coffee when Sheriff Martinez's voice crackled through my radio. "Dan, we've got another missing person. Third one this month. Family's frantic." I pulled on my boots, the same weathered morel hikers that had carried me through 1,000 searches. The routine was muscle memory, GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency radio, water, energy bars, headlamp, spare batteries. I'd kept all my gear even after they forced me out. Stress-related burnout, they called it. I called it seeing too much. "Details?" I asked, checking my compass out of habit. "Sarah Chen, 26, from Portland, experienced hiker. Was supposed to check in yesterday from the Thoroughfare region. Her GPS beacon went dead around noon." The Thoroughfare, most remote area in the lower 48. If you wanted to disappear someone, that's where you'd do it. I drove the 40 minutes to the trailhead in my pickup, watching the sun struggle through October clouds. The aspens had already dropped most of their leaves, creating a carpet that would muffle footsteps and hide sign. Not ideal tracking conditions, but I'd worked with worse. The parking area held 3 vehicles: Sarah's blue Subaru Outback, a black Ford F-150 with Montana plates, and an older Chevy sedan. I noted the license numbers automatically, a habit that had saved my ass more than once. Sarah's car was clean, organized. Water bottles in the cup holders, energy bar wrappers in a small trash bag, trail map folded neatly in the passenger seat. Someone who planned ahead. The trail started easy, following Yellowstone River through meadows that would be stunning in summer but now felt exposed, vulnerable. I found Sarah's sign almost immediately: size 7 hiking boots, probably Merrell like mine, with a distinctive wear pattern on the right heel. She'd been moving steadily, no hesitation in her gait. For the first hour, everything looked normal. Sarah had stuck to the main trail, stopped once to drink water, scuff mark where she'd sat on a fallen log, and maintained good pace. Then, 3 miles in, I found the first anomaly. Sarah's tracks veered off trail, not gradually, like someone exploring, sharply as if she'd suddenly decided to follow something into the timber. I knelt beside the departure point, studying the compressed leaves and broken vegetation. Her stride had lengthened here, almost like she was hurrying to catch up with someone. But I saw no other tracks. I followed her path into the trees, my senses automatically cataloguing the environment. The forest felt wrong, too quiet. In 7 years of ranging, you develop an ear for natural silence versus unnatural absence of sound. This was the latter. A squirrel should have chattered at my intrusion. Birds should have called. Instead, I heard only wind through bare branches and the distant rumble of water over stone. Sarah's trail led deeper into unmarked wilderness, winding between massive Douglas firs and across small clearings where frost still glazed the grass. She'd been moving faster now. I could tell from the stride length and the way her feet had dug into softer earth. Running? No, not quite, but definitely hurrying. After another mile, I found where she'd stopped. The clearing was perhaps 50 feet across, ringed by towering pines. In the center, someone had arranged 7 stones in a perfect circle. Each stone was roughly the size of a human head, and they'd been positioned with geometric precision. This wasn't some random pile left by hikers. This was deliberate, ritualistic. Sarah's tracks circled the stones twice before approaching. I could see where she'd knelt beside the northernmost rock, a depression in the pine needles, heel marks from her boots. She'd stayed there for several minutes, based on how the needles were compressed. What had she been looking at? I examined the stones carefully. They appeared to be granite, not native to this immediate area. Someone had carried them here, positioned them purposefully. No tool marks that I could see, but the circle was too perfect for casual placement. That's when I noticed the carving. On the stone where Sarah had knelt, someone had etched a symbol into the granite. 3 interlocking circles, with lines radiating outward like a sun. The carving was fresh, granite dust still visible in the grooves. Done recently, probably within the last week. My spine prickled. In 7 years of ranging, I'd learned to trust that feeling. It meant someone was watching. I stood slowly, letting my eyes sweep the tree line without making it obvious. Nothing moved. No flash of color that didn't belong. But the feeling persisted, heavy as smoke in my chest. Sarah's trail resumed on the far side of the clearing, heading deeper into the thoroughfare. But now I noticed something that made my mouth go dry. Her tracks had changed. The stride was different, shorter, more careful, like someone learning to walk in unfamiliar boots. The wear pattern on the heel had shifted slightly, and the depth of impression was inconsistent with her earlier gait. Either Sarah Chen had developed a sudden limp, or someone else was wearing her boots. I followed the false trail for another half-mile before my instincts screamed at me to stop. The tracks led to a narrow canyon where Cabin Creek carved its way between towering rock walls. Perfect place for an ambush. Perfect place to disappear someone permanently. I backtracked to the stone circle and began searching for what I'd missed the first time. It took 20 minutes, but I found it. A second set of tracks so carefully concealed that most searchers would have walked right past. bare feet. Someone had approached the clearing without shoes, moving from stone to stone to avoid leaving prints. Only the faintest pressure marks on moss gave them away. Size 12 roughly, with unusually long toes. Someone comfortable moving through wilderness without protection. The bare foot tracks led away from the clearing in a completely different direction, northwest toward a region I knew contained several abandoned mining claims from the 1920s, remote enough that you could operate without interference, isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry. I followed the bare foot trail for 3 hours, moving carefully to avoid leaving obvious sign of my own passage. Twice I had to climb over fallen trees that the barefoot person had navigated with surprising grace. Whoever this was knew how to move through wilderness. The trail led through dense forest, across 2 small streams, and up a steep ridgeline that would challenge even experienced hikers. But the bare footprints never wavered, never showed hesitation. This person knew exactly where they were going. Near the ridgetop, I found the second anomaly. A tree had been marked with the same symbol I'd seen on the stone, 3 interlocking circles with radiating lines. But this carving was older, weathered, maybe weeks or months old. Someone had been using this route repeatedly, marking waypoints like breadcrumbs. The implications hit me like cold water. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was planned, systematic, possibly not the first time. I thought about Sheriff Martinez's words, 3rd one this month. 3 missing hikers, 3 experienced outdoors people who'd simply vanished in Yellowstone's backcountry, all in areas remote enough that their disappearances could be explained by natural causes. Bear attacks, hypothermia, accidental falls. The kind of explanations that close cases and stop asking uncomfortable questions. From the ridgetop, I could see down into a narrow valley that didn't appear on any tourist map. Smoke rose from somewhere in the trees below, a thin column that spoke of a controlled fire, not a wildfire. Someone was down there, and they were trying not to be noticed. I checked my radio. No signal this deep in the wilderness. My GPS showed my location clearly enough, but if something happened to me here, it might be days before anyone found my body. I should have turned back, should have hiked out, called for backup, let the FBI handle what was clearly becoming a federal case. But Sarah Chen was down there somewhere, and I'd lost too many people already to bureaucratic caution. I began my descent into the unnamed valley. The barefoot trail led down a game path that deer had worn into the hillside over decades. Whoever I was following had used this route many times. I could see older impressions in the soil, layers of passage that spoke of routine travel. Halfway down, I smelled wood smoke mixed with something else, something organic and unpleasant that reminded me of decomposition. My ranger training had exposed me to enough death to recognize the odor, but this seemed wrong somehow, too controlled. Too intentional. The trees opened into a small meadow surrounding a cluster of abandoned mining buildings. 3 structures, a main cabin that had been recently repaired, a smaller outbuilding, and what looked like an old equipment shed. Solar panels had been added to the cabin roof, and I could see a small wind generator spinning lazily in the breeze. Someone had made this place livable. I positioned myself behind a fallen log about 200 yards from the buildings and studied the scene through binoculars I'd carried since my ranging days. The main cabin showed signs of recent habitation, fresh chinking between the logs, new windows, a well-maintained woodpile. A garden plot had been cleared near the smaller building, though nothing grew there now in late October. No people visible, but smoke continued to rise from the cabin's chimney. That's when I saw the cages. Behind the equipment shed, partially concealed by tarps, someone had constructed a series of metal enclosures. Each was roughly the size of a large dog kennel, but built heavier, stronger, built to hold something that might try to escape. My blood turned to ice water. I was studying the cages through my binoculars when movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. Someone had emerged from the tree line to my left, a tall, thin man wearing dark clothing and moving with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in wilderness. He was carrying Sarah Chen's hiking boots. The man walked directly to the cabin without looking around, as if he owned the place, as if he had no concern about being observed. At the door, he paused and turned to scan the forest. Even at 200 yards, I could see him smile. He knew I was there. The man raised Sarah's boots over his head in a gesture that was unmistakably theatrical, unmistakably a message. Then he disappeared inside the cabin. I had two choices: retreat and call for backup that might arrive too late, or get closer and try to determine if Sarah was still alive. The professional in me said retreat. The human being in me thought about those cages and knew I couldn't walk away. I began moving toward the buildings, using fallen logs and brush for concealment. My ranger training had included basic tactical movement, and the terrain provided good cover for someone who knew how to use it. I was 50 yards from the cabin when the front door opened again. "Dan Rivers," a voice called out. "Former Yellowstone Ranger, 7 years of service, forced retirement due to stress-related burnout. You can stop hiding behind that deadfall. I've been expecting you." I froze. The voice was educated, cultured, not what I'd expected from someone living rough in abandoned mining camps. "My name is Dr. Marcus Thorne," the voice continued. "I was a professor of philosophy at the University of Montana until 3 years ago. I imagine you're wondering about Ms. Chen's welfare." Against every instinct, I stood up. Dr. Thorne was visible in the cabin doorway, hands empty, posture relaxed. He appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of lean build that suggested ascetic living rather than poverty. "Sarah Chen is alive," he said. "For now. Whether she remains so depends on your willingness to engage in a philosophical discussion." "Let her go," I called back. "This is between you and me." Dr. Thorne laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. "Oh, Mr. Rivers, you still think this is about random crime, don't you? About one person's madness affecting innocent hikers?" He stepped out of the cabin, moving with confidence that suggested he felt completely in control of the situation. "This is about evolution," he continued, "about returning humanity to its natural state, about stripping away the comfortable lies of civilization and revealing what we really are when everything else is taken away." I kept my hands visible, non-threatening, while mentally calculating distances and cover options. "And what's that?" "Prey animals with delusions of grandeur." Dr. Thorne gestured toward the cages behind the shed. "I've been conducting research, Mr. Rivers. Important research. The 3 individuals who've gone missing weren't victims. They were participants in crucial experiments designed to reveal fundamental truths about human nature." "Participants implies consent. Does it?" His smile widened. "Or does it simply imply understanding the greater purpose their sacrifice serves?" The way he spoke, calm, rational, like he was lecturing a classroom, was more disturbing than screaming madness would have been. This man believed completely in what he was doing. "I lost my family 3 years ago," Dr. Thorne continued, beginning to walk slowly in my direction. "Car accident. Drunk driver. The man who killed them received 5 years in prison and was released after 2 for good behavior. The system failed. Civilization failed. Justice failed." He stopped about 30 yards away, close enough that I could see his eyes clearly. They were intelligent, focused, and completely without remorse. "But I learned something from that failure, Mr. Rivers. I learned that all our social constructs are illusions. That beneath the veneer of law and order and human decency, we're still just animals driven by fear and survival instinct. And once I understood that, everything became clear." "The symbols," I said. "The stone circle. You're marking territory." "Very good." His approval seemed genuine. "Yes, I'm marking territory, creating sacred spaces where the pretense can be stripped away and people can discover who they really are when death becomes imminent." "And who are they?" "Terrified children calling for help that never comes." Dr. Thorne gestured toward the mining buildings. "I've built a laboratory here, Mr. Rivers, a place where I can test my theories under controlled conditions. Each subject teaches me something new about the breaking point where civilization ends and animal desperation begins." The other hikers. "Michael Thompson lasted 6 days before hypothermia took him. Jennifer Walsh lasted 9 before dehydration proved fatal. Both provided valuable data about psychological deterioration under extreme stress." He spoke about them like they were lab rats. "Sarah Chen has been here 4 days," he continued. "She's proven remarkably resilient. Strong survival instinct, excellent problem-solving skills under pressure. Rather like yourself, I imagine. Where is she? Dr. Thorne pointed toward the smaller outbuilding. Secured, but unharmed, for now. Whether she continues to remain unharmed depends on your willingness to participate in my research. What kind of participation? A test, Mr. Rivers. A simple test of everything that makes you who you are. He began walking again, angling toward the tree line rather than approaching me directly, giving me space, reducing the threat level, making me think I still had options. You see, I've studied your file extensively. 7 years as a ranger. Exceptional tracking abilities, uncanny talent for reading natural environments, several commendations for finding lost hikers when other searchers failed. Dr. Thorne paused beside a large pine tree, resting one hand against the bark like he was greeting an old friend. But what interests me most is why you left the service. The official report mentions stress-related burnout, but I suspect there's more to it. Something you haven't told anyone. Something that broke your faith in the system you served. My mouth went dry. He couldn't know about the Hendricks family. Ah, he said, seeing my expression change. There it is. The moment when the mask slips and I see the real Dan Rivers underneath. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? His smile was predatory now. Robert Hendricks, age 42, wife Amanda, 38. Twin daughters Emma and Sophie, age 7. Family camping trip to Yellowstone, August 2019. They went missing during your shift, Mr. Rivers. The memories hit me like physical blows. 5 days of searching, 5 days of following false leads and dead-end trails, while 2 little girls spent their final hours scared and alone in the wilderness. You found them too late, Dr. Thorne continued. Exposure and dehydration. The parents died trying to protect their children, but protection is just another comfortable lie, isn't it? In the end, they all died the same way, terrified and helpless. They got lost in a storm. Equipment failure. Nothing anyone could have prevented. Could have been prevented if you'd trusted your instincts instead of following procedure. Could have been prevented if you'd ignored the official search pattern and followed your gut. Could have been prevented if you'd acted like a human being instead of a bureaucrat. Every word hit home because every word was true. I'd known the official search was wrong. I'd felt it in my bones, the same way I'd felt Dr. Thorne watching me today. But I'd followed orders instead of instinct, and 4 people died because of it. That's why you quit, Dr. Thorne said. Not stress, guilt, the knowledge that your compliance with authority cost lives. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Which brings us to the current situation, he continued. Sarah Chen is going to die, Mr. Rivers. Just like the others. Just like the Hendricks family. The only question is whether her death serves a greater purpose. What do you want? I want you to choose. Dr. Thorne gestured toward the buildings. Inside that cabin are keys to Ms. Chen's restraints. Also inside is a comprehensive record of my research, video footage of my subjects, detailed notes on their psychological deterioration, analysis of survival strategies under extreme duress. He paused, letting the implications sink in. You can save Ms. Chen, but only by destroying my research. And my research represents the only evidence of what happened to Michael Thompson and Jennifer Walsh. Destroy it, and their families will never know the truth about how they died. That's not a choice. That's extortion. No, Mr. Rivers. That's life. Real life, where every decision carries a cost and there are no perfect answers. Dr. Thorne began walking back toward the cabin, his movements casual and unhurried. You have 30 minutes to decide. After that, Miss Chen's situation becomes irreversible. I watched him disappear inside the cabin, my mind racing through options. I could try to overpower him, but he demonstrated knowledge of my presence long before I'd seen him. He was planning for this encounter, probably had contingencies in place. I could try to find Sarah on my own, but the buildings were too exposed. Any approach would be visible from the cabin windows, or I could accept his terms and make the choice he'd offered. 30 minutes. I used them to scout the compound, looking for weaknesses in Dr. Thorne's setup. The smaller building where he claimed Sarah was being held had no windows, but I could see fresh scratch marks around the lock, evidence of repeated use. The equipment shed contained what looked like scientific instruments, computers, and video equipment. Everything he'd need to document his research. The cages behind the shed were empty, but showed signs of recent use. Worn spots where bodies had pressed against the metal, scratch marks from fingernails, dark stains that could have been blood or other bodily fluids. I was examining the cages when Dr. Thorne's voice called out again. "Time's up, Mr. Rivers. Have you reached a decision?" I walked back toward the cabin, hands visible, moving slowly. "I want to see Sarah first. Proof she's alive." "Of course." Dr. Thorne emerged from the cabin carrying a key ring and a tablet computer. He walked to the smaller building, unlocked the door and gestured for me to approach. Inside, Sarah Chen sat in a chair that had been bolted to the floor. Her hands were secured behind her back, but she appeared uninjured, frightened, exhausted, but alive. "Sarah," I said, "are you hurt?" She shook her head, eyes wide. "He's crazy," she whispered. "He thinks he's conducting some kind of experiment." "I am conducting an experiment," Dr. Thorne corrected. "And it's proceeding exactly as planned." He showed me the tablet screen, video footage of Sarah in the chair, timestamp showing 4 days of recordings, similar folders labeled Thompson and Walsh. "Everything is documented," he said, "their fear, their desperation, their final moments. Invaluable data about human psychology under extreme conditions. You're insane. I'm a scientist. The distinction between the two is often academic." Dr. Thorne gestured back toward the cabin. "The research is stored on a computer inside. Destroy it and Ms. Chen goes free. But the families of the other subjects will never learn what happened to their loved ones." I looked at Sarah, then back at Dr. Thorne. "There's a third option." "Oh?" "I take you back with me. Let the law decide your fate." Dr. Thorne laughed. "The law, Mr. Rivers? The same system that gave a drunk driver 2 years for killing my family? The same system that forced you to follow procedure while the Hendricks family died?" He had a point, and we both knew it. "Besides," he continued, "I have no intention of leaving this place. My research is too important to abandon." "Then we have a problem." "Do we?" I'd been thinking while he talked, using the time to study the setup, the angles, the possibilities. Dr. Thorne was intelligent, but intelligence could become arrogance, and arrogance could become carelessness. "You made a mistake," I told him. "Did I?" "You assumed I'd accept your choice, save Sarah or preserve the evidence. But there's something you don't know about former Rangers." I smiled for the first time since arriving in the valley. "We're really good at improvising." Dr. Thorne's confident expression faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, I pulled out my GPS unit and showed him the screen. "I've been marking waypoints since I found Sarah's false trail. Every symbol you carved, every marker you left, every step of the route to this place." His face went pale. "And when I checked in with Sheriff Martinez this morning, I mentioned finding unusual markings in the thoroughfare region, standard procedure for suspicious activity." I put the GPS away and met his eyes directly. "Search and rescue is already en route, Dr. Thorne. Has been for the last 2 hours. Your 30-minute deadline was meaningless because help was already coming." For the first time since I'd seen him, Dr. Thorne looked uncertain. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "You studied my file, but did you study my methods? I never go into the wilderness without leaving a trail. 7 years of experience taught me that assumption gets people killed." I gestured toward the valley around us. "This place is about to become a crime scene. Your research will be preserved as evidence. The families will learn the truth, and Sarah goes home alive." Dr. Thorne stared at me for a long moment, his careful composure finally cracking. "You don't understand," he said. "My work here is vital. I'm learning things about human nature that could change everything. What you're learning is that people fight to survive. That's not a revelation. That's common sense. But the data is torture porn dressed up as science." I could hear the distant sound of helicopters now, growing louder. Dr. Thorne heard it too. 3 years, he said, almost to himself. 3 years of work. 3 years of murder. The helicopters were close enough now that I could see them through the trees, 2 aircraft approaching from the southeast. Search and rescue, just as I'd claimed. Dr. Thorne looked at the approaching aircraft, then back at me. The mask of calm rationality had completely fallen away, revealing something desperate and broken underneath. "You still don't understand," he said. "None of this matters. The experiment will continue." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he pulled a small device from his pocket, a remote control of some kind. "Dead man's switch," he explained. "I release this button, and everything burns. The buildings, the computers, all the evidence, Ms. Chen included." My blood went cold. "Don't do this." "I told you, Mr. Rivers, this is about evolution, about revealing what we really are when everything else is stripped away." He smiled, and for the first time I saw genuine madness in his eyes. "What are you when you can't save everyone?" The helicopters were directly overhead now, beginning their descent into the meadow. But they were too far away, too slow. If Dr. Thorne released that switch, Sarah would die before anyone could reach her. I had seconds to act. 7 years of ranger training, 7 years of learning to trust instinct over procedure, 7 years of understanding that sometimes the only choice is to act without certainty. I launched myself at Dr. Thorne. He was expecting it, probably had been since the helicopters appeared. But what he wasn't expecting was my complete disregard for my own safety. Instead of trying to tackle him carefully, I dove straight at his hand holding the remote. We went down hard, rolling in the dirt and pine needles. Dr. Thorne was stronger than he looked, wiry and desperate, but I'd spent 7 years hauling injured hikers out of wilderness and wrestling with panicked animals. The remote flew from his grasp, skittering across the ground toward the tree line. We fought over it for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 seconds. Dr. Thorne reached it first, fingers closing around the device just as my boot came down on his wrist. The sound of breaking bone was audible even over the helicopters. Dr. Thorne screamed and released the remote. I kicked it away, then pinned him to the ground while search and rescue personnel rappelled from the aircraft. "It's over," I told him. But Dr. Thorne was laughing now, a sound more disturbing than his screams had been. "Is it, Mr. Rivers? Is it really over?" I didn't understand what he meant until later, when the FBI technical team examined his computer systems. Dr. Thorne had been in contact with others, people who shared his philosophy, his methods, his complete disregard for human life. The Yellowstone operation was just one cell in a larger network. But that's a story for another day. Right now, Sarah Chen was alive, and Dr. Thorne was in custody. The families of Michael Thompson and Jennifer Walsh would finally learn the truth about their loved ones. Sometimes that's all you can do, save the people in front of you and let tomorrow worry about itself. As the medical helicopter carried Sarah toward the hospital in Billings, she grabbed my hand. "Thank you," she said. "How did you know to call for backup?" I looked out the window at Yellowstone's wilderness, stretching endlessly in all directions. Thousands of square miles of beauty and danger, hiding countless secrets. "I didn't," I told her. I lied to him about the GPS waypoints, about calling in the search. But I learned something important today. "What's that?" "Sometimes the best way to beat someone who thinks they're smarter than you is to make them think you're playing their game, when really you're playing your own." Sarah managed a weak smile. "And what game were you playing?" I thought about Dr. Thorne's broken wrist, about his research that would now become evidence in federal prosecutions, about the families who would finally have answers. "Trust," I said. "I was playing trust. 3 months later, I got my job back with the National Park Service. Turns out that stopping serial killers is good for your employment prospects, even if you did technically exceed your authority in doing so. I still work search and rescue in Yellowstone, still trust my instincts over procedure when lives are on the line, still think about the Hendricks family sometimes, and about how different things might have been if I'd acted on what I felt instead of what I was told. But I also think about Sarah Chen, alive and well back in Portland, about Michael Thompson and Jennifer Walsh, whose families finally got to bury them properly, about the dozen other potential victims who won't become statistics because Dr. Marcus Thorne's network is being systematically dismantled by federal law enforcement. Sometimes you can't save everyone, but sometimes you can save someone, and that has to be enough. My name is Dan Rivers, and I learned that the wilderness isn't the only place where predators hunt, but it's also not the only place where they can be stopped. My name is Miguel Silva, and I spent 7 years as a forest ranger for IBAMA before I learned that some predators walk on 2 legs and think 3 steps ahead of everyone else. The call came in at 5:47 a.m. on October 28th. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my phone, debating whether to hit snooze again, when Director Santos's voice cut through my morning fog. Miguel, we need you at Tapajos. Dead animals, missing research team. Can you be there by noon? I sat up in my cramped apartment in Santarém, already reaching for my gear bag. What kind of dead animals? Multiple species, monkeys, birds, even a jaguar, all in the same 5-kilometer radius near the INPA research station. That got my attention. In 7 years of forest work, I'd never seen a cross-species die-off like that outside of disease outbreaks, and those didn't usually take down apex predators. The research team? Dr. Marcelo Veras and 3 graduate students. Last contact was 6 days ago. Their equipment is still transmitting location data, but no human response. I was already pulling on my field clothes. Environmental contamination? That's what we need you to find out. Local authorities think it's poison, maybe illegal mining runoff. But... Santos paused. Miguel, I'm sending you specifically because if there's something else going on, something they're missing, you'll find it. He was referring to my track record. In my years with IBAMA, I'd developed a reputation for seeing patterns others missed, for finding evidence that shouldn't exist, for knowing when something was wrong before I could explain why. My colleagues called it intuition. I called it listening to what the forest was trying to tell me. By 6:30, I was loading my gear into the agency pickup. GPS units, water testing kit, camera equipment, emergency medical supplies, satellite phone. The standard kit, plus a few personal additions. My grandfather's compass, a small notebook where I recorded behavioral observations, and a knife that had never failed me. The 3-hour drive to the Tapajos forest gave me time to think. Dr. Marcelo Veras wasn't a name I recognized, but INPA researchers were usually competent people. For an entire team to go silent while their equipment kept working suggested either a rapid evacuation or something preventing them from responding. The first anomaly hit me before I even reached the research station. At kilometer marker 47, where the dirt road branched toward the INPA camp, I stopped to check my map. That's when I noticed the silence. Not the normal forest quiet. This was different. Wrong. I've spent enough time in the Amazon to know its rhythms. Morning should have been alive with howler monkeys, parrots, the rustle of hundreds of species going about their business. Instead, I heard only the distant hum of insects and the soft drip of moisture from yesterday's rain. I stepped out of the truck and immediately felt it, that prickle along my neck that meant I was being watched. Not by animals, by something that understood I was here and was taking measure of me. I looked around carefully, using my peripheral vision more than direct focus. Nothing moved, but 20 meters to my left, a branch hung at an odd angle, freshly broken about 3 meters up. Too high for most animals, wrong pattern for storm damage. I walked over to examine it. The break was clean, deliberate. Something had grabbed this branch and snapped it with purpose. I looked up at the canopy, tracing sight lines. From this position, someone could have had a clear view of the road in both directions. A lookout post. I took photos and continued toward the camp, but now I was paying attention to everything. At the next bend, I found tire tracks in a muddy section. 2 vehicles, one coming and one going, but at different times based on how the mud had dried around them. The deeper tracks were older, maybe 4 days. The lighter ones were recent, possibly yesterday. The INPE research station sat in a cleared area beside the Tapajos River, a cluster of prefab buildings and equipment shelters designed for temporary scientific occupancy. As I pulled up, everything looked normal from a distance. Solar panels, generator housing, communication antenna. But as I got closer, the wrongness became more apparent. The camp was too clean. I've been to dozens of research stations. Scientists are organized, but they're also human. There are usually coffee cups left on tables, equipment cases partially unpacked, someone's laundry hanging to dry. This place looked like a museum display of how a research camp should appear. I parked and stepped out, immediately checking the ground. Here's where my tracking abilities came in handy. Most people see dirt and assume it holds no information. I see a story written in compressed earth, scuff marks, and disturbed debris. The story here was interesting. Multiple sets of footprints, but arranged in an unusual pattern. The research team's prints, I could identify 4 different boot types consistent with 4 people. All converged on the main lab building 3 days ago. But there was another set, work boots with a distinctive tread pattern, that circled the entire camp at a distance of about 30 meters. Someone had been watching the station, taking time to observe from multiple angles before ever approaching directly. I followed the circling tracks first. They were methodical, stopping at points that offered optimal viewing angles. Whoever made them had wanted to understand the camp's routine, its vulnerabilities, its blind spots. This wasn't casual observation. This was reconnaissance. At the northernmost point of the circle, I found something that made my pulse quicken. A small pile of dead leaves arranged in a neat triangle with a single red flower placed at its center. No natural process creates that pattern. Someone had left a calling card. I photographed it and continued my examination. The direct approach tracks showed the unknown person had eventually walked straight to the main lab, spent considerable time there based on the wear patterns, then departed toward the river. The research team's tracks simply stopped. All 4 sets ended at the lab building entrance 3 days ago, and none emerged. I drew my sidearm before entering the lab. The interior was immaculate. Too immaculate. Equipment neatly arranged, no dust, no signs of hurried evacuation. But here's what caught my attention. The computers were running screensavers, not shut down properly. The coffee maker was empty, but still warm to the touch. Someone had been maintaining this space since the team disappeared. On the main work table, I found a research notebook left open to a page titled Behavioral Modifications in Stress Response, Day 12. The handwriting was precise, clinical. Subjects continue to demonstrate predictable fear responses to environmental stimuli. The introduction of olfactory triggers, decomposition scents, has proven particularly effective in generating flight patterns. Note: higher intelligence subjects require more sophisticated stimuli to achieve desired stress levels. This wasn't part of any animal behavior study I'd ever seen. The language was wrong, the methodology disturbing. I flipped backward through the notebook. The early entries described normal fieldwork, population counts, feeding patterns, territorial behaviors. But starting 8 days ago, the tone changed dramatically. Begin Phase 2, Human Subject Introduction. Target selected based on optimal skill level and psychological profile. Preliminary observation phase initiated. My hands went cold as I read further. This wasn't research on animals. This was research on people. And from the timeline, it suggested Dr. Veras had been studying me specifically since I'd received the assignment. I heard footsteps outside. Not hurried, not trying to be stealthy. Confident, measured steps approaching the lab entrance. I moved to a position beside the door, gun ready. Mr. Silva. The voice was calm, educated, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Please don't point that weapon at me when I enter. I'm unarmed, and I have something important to show you. I kept the gun ready but didn't respond. I know you found my notebook by now. I left it open to that specific page because I wanted you to understand the situation correctly from the beginning. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. My name is Dr. Marcelo Veras. I am the missing researcher you came to find. I'm also the person who requested your assignment specifically. You see, Miguel, may I call you Miguel? You represent something quite rare in modern society. A human being whose survival instincts haven't been dulled by civilization. I still didn't answer, but I was thinking furiously. The notebook, the watching posts, the too clean camp. This was all deliberate. I've spent the past 6 days studying you through your personnel files, your case reports, your patterns of behavior. You have abilities that most humans have lost. You read environments the way most people read newspapers. You detect threats before your conscious mind has processed them. You navigate by instincts that evolution spent millions of years perfecting. A pause. I want to test those abilities against something they were never designed to handle. A human predator. who thinks as clearly as you feel. The footsteps resumed, moving away from the lab. I waited 30 seconds, then moved to the window. A man in his 40s, lean and fit, was walking calmly toward the river. He didn't look back. On the table where the notebook had been, he'd left a GPS unit with a message taped to it. Coordinates to your real assignment. Come alone. Come unarmed. Come ready to prove that intuition can triumph over intelligence. I checked the coordinates. 2 kilometers upriver, in an area I'd mapped during a survey 3 years ago. Dense canopy, multiple creek beds, terrain that favored someone who could move quietly and read sign. I should have called for backup. Should have contacted Santos immediately. But something in Veras's tone told me he would disappear if I involved others, and then I'd never find out what happened to the graduate students. More than that, though, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine respect for an adversary. Veras wasn't some opportunistic criminal or desperate poacher. He was intelligent, methodical, and he understood exactly who I was and what I could do. He was challenging me to a contest where my abilities would be matched against his planning. I made my decision. I left the gun in the truck, took only my knife, compass, and water. If this was going to be a test of pure skill against intelligence, I wanted it to be fair. The walk to the coordinates took me through some of the densest forest in the region. Within the first 100 meters, I realized Veras was tracking my progress, not following directly but monitoring. I kept catching peripheral glimpses of movement, always just outside clear sight. At the halfway point, I found my first intentional sign, another triangle of leaves, this time with a white flower, arranged beside a fallen log. Underneath the arrangement was a note. Excellent route choice. You're moving exactly as I predicted, which confirms my hypothesis about optimal efficiency in natural navigation. However, you're also adapting your pace and brake patterns in ways my models didn't account for. Fascinating. The note was signed with coordinates for a new location deeper into the forest. I was being herded, but intelligently. Each waypoint was positioned to guide me along the path of least resistance, while simultaneously testing different aspects of my abilities. One required crossing a stream where the obvious ford had been subtly sabotaged, forcing me to find an alternative. Another led through an area where Veras had disturbed the normal forest sounds, creating an artificial danger signal that I had to interpret correctly. By the 4th waypoint, I was beginning to understand the scope of what he was doing. This wasn't just a chase or a game. It was a comprehensive examination of human survival instincts, conducted by someone who understood both psychology and woodcraft at an expert level. The 5th note was longer. Miguel, I need you to understand why this matters. 3 years ago, my research funding was cut because I refused to falsify data about deforestation impacts. My career was destroyed by colleagues who prioritized politics over science. My family left me because I became obsessed with what they called abstract theories. But I wasn't obsessed with abstractions. I was trying to understand something crucial. Why some humans still possess the adaptive instincts that kept our species alive for millennia, while others have become helpless consumers dependent on technology for every decision. You represent the first type. The graduate students represented the second type. This isn't about harming anyone. It's about proving that human evolution is still active, that survival traits still emerge in individuals like you, and that society needs to recognize and cultivate these abilities instead of discouraging them. The students are safe, by the way, frightened but unharmed. They're serving as a control group in a shelter I prepared 2 kilometers south of here. They've had food, water, and protection for 6 days, but they've made no attempt to escape or self-rescue, despite having every opportunity. They're waiting to be saved rather than taking action to save themselves. You, however, are here. You came alone. You accepted the challenge. You're demonstrating everything I theorized about adaptive human behavior. Final coordinates below. Come and let's finish this properly. I looked at the coordinates and felt a chill. He was directing me to Devil's Kitchen, a natural formation I knew well. A box canyon with steep walls and only one entrance. Perfect terrain for a final confrontation, but also perfect for a trap. I had a choice. I could leave now, call for helicopter extraction of the students and let Veras disappear into the forest, or I could see this through to its conclusion and find out exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. My pride made the decision for me. Devil's Kitchen was a 20-minute walk through increasingly difficult terrain. As I approached, I could smell wood smoke. Veras had built a fire. When I reached the canyon entrance, I found him sitting calmly beside a small campfire, a notebook in his lap. 47 minutes from the last waypoint, he said without looking up. 6 minutes faster than my optimal projection, despite the fact that you stopped twice to examine my trail sign. Remarkable efficiency. I stayed at the canyon entrance studying the situation. Veras appeared unarmed, but the canyon walls offered multiple positions for concealed weapons or allies. The fire was positioned to illuminate him while keeping me in relative shadow, a subtle psychological advantage. Where are the students? Safe. I told you that already. He gestured to a stack of equipment beside the fire. Emergency radio is right there. One call brings helicopter rescue within 30 minutes. They'll be home by tonight with a story they'll tell for the rest of their lives. And then what? Veras finally looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine admiration. Then you and I finish our conversation. You've proven my hypothesis correct, Miguel. You navigated terrain that would challenge experienced guides. You read my trail signs correctly. You detected my surveillance. You made tactical decisions based on incomplete information, and every decision was sound. He stood slowly, hands visible and empty. But more than that, you came here knowing it might be a trap, because you recognized something important. I'm not a common criminal. I'm someone like you, someone who operates at a level most people don't understand. You came because you wanted to know if you could match yourself against real intelligence instead of just solving problems that others couldn't handle. There was truth in that, and it bothered me. You're also someone who kidnapped 4 people and manipulated federal agencies to get me here. I am, Veras nodded calmly. I committed crimes to create this opportunity. I accept full responsibility for that. But I also created something unprecedented. A controlled test of human adaptive ability, conducted under real stress conditions with a worthy subject. He pulled a thick folder from his equipment stack. 6 days of observations, Miguel. Documentation of capabilities that most scientists would dismiss as luck or exaggeration. Proof that human evolution is still active, that survival instincts can be maintained and developed even in modern society. What do you want? I want you to understand what you are and what that means. Veras opened the folder and began reading. Day 1. Subject detected surveillance within 4 hours of arrival, despite optimal concealment positions. Day 2. Subject identified artificial trail signs and correctly interpreted their strategic purpose. Day 3. Subject demonstrated spatial memory by referencing terrain features from previous assignment 3 years ago. Day 4. Subject adapted movement patterns based on predicted observer positions without direct evidence of observation. He looked up at me. You're not just good at your job, Miguel. You're a genetic throwback to humans who survived ice ages and predator encounters and environmental catastrophes that killed 99% of their contemporaries. And society has no framework for recognizing or developing people like you. So you decided to conduct an experiment. I decided to document proof. These graduate students, they're intelligent, educated, physically capable young people. But in 6 days of captivity, with minimal restraints and multiple escape opportunities, they never attempted to free themselves. They waited. They assumed someone else would solve their problem. Veras gestured around the canyon. You, on the other hand, came here alone to face an unknown threat because that's what needed to be done. You didn't wait for backup or authorization or additional resources. You assessed the situation and acted. I was beginning to understand what he was trying to prove, and it disturbed me because part of it made sense. You're saying modern humans have lost survival instincts. I'm saying most have, but not all, and individuals like you need to be identified and trained and placed in positions where those instincts can benefit society. Instead, we give the important decisions to people who think everything can be solved with better policies and more technology. Veras closed the folder. I lost my family because I believed this strongly enough to sacrifice my career for it. I've spent 3 years living in forest camps and studying survival psychology because no university would support research that contradicts the fundamental assumption of modern civilization, that all humans are basically equivalent and that intelligence alone determines capability. He was passionate, articulate, and completely obsessed. I could see how he'd become dangerous. The students, Veras, they need to go home. They do, and they will. He pointed again to the radio. One call, but first I need to know if you understand what you've accomplished here. I followed your breadcrumbs to a meeting you orchestrated. That's not accomplishment. That's manipulation. No. Veras shook his head firmly. You consistently made decisions that optimized your chances of success while minimizing unnecessary risks. You detected threats before they materialized. You adapted to changing conditions faster than theoretical models suggest should be possible. You demonstrated abilities that are becoming extinct in human populations. He stepped closer, and I noticed that his hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with excitement. Miguel, I've documented the first scientifically rigorous proof that human survival evolution is still active. Your performance here will revolutionize our understanding of adaptive psychology. By kidnapping people and manipulating federal investigations, by creating conditions where true ability could be measured without interference from artificial support systems. I realized that Veras was past rational argument. His theory had become more important to him than ethics, legality, or basic human decency, but he was also brilliant, methodical, and genuinely impressed with my performance. That last part was his weakness. You're right about one thing, I said. I did come here because I recognized something in you. Intelligence, planning, attention to detail. Veras nodded eagerly. But you made one critical error in your experimental design. What error? You assumed that because I could match your intelligence, I would share your priorities. I moved faster than he expected, closing the distance between us in 3 steps. Veras was fit and alert, but he'd spent too much time thinking and not enough time preparing for physical confrontation. I had the radio in my hands before he could react. This is IBAMA Agent Miguel Silva, requesting immediate helicopter support for hostage recovery in Sector 7 of Tapajos National Forest. 4 civilians in need of extraction. As I gave coordinates and details to the response team, Veras sat down heavily beside his fire. You're going to destroy everything, he said quietly. 3 years of research. Proof that could change how we understand human potential. I'm going to make sure 4 people get home safely. And what about the knowledge? What about understanding what you really are? I looked at him for a long moment. Despite everything he'd done, I felt something like sympathy for Dr. Marcelo Veras. He was brilliant, dedicated, and completely wrong about what mattered. I know what I am, I said. I'm someone who solves problems and protects people. I don't need your research to validate that. The helicopter arrived 43 minutes later. The graduate students were exactly where Veras said they would be, frightened but unharmed in a well-supplied shelter. They'd had opportunities to escape, just as he'd claimed, but they'd waited for rescue instead of attempting self-liberation. Veras didn't resist arrest. As they led him to the helicopter, he stopped beside me. You proved everything I theorized about adaptive human behavior, he said. But you also proved something I didn't anticipate. What's that? That the most evolved human trait isn't survival instinct or environmental intelligence. It's the ability to use those capabilities in service of others, rather than just yourself. 3 months later, I received a letter from Dr. Veras in federal prison. He'd been convicted on multiple charges, but was using his time to write a book about evolutionary psychology. The letter included a single paragraph that I've never forgotten. Miguel, you taught me that my research was incomplete. I studied how humans adapt to threats, but I failed to understand that the highest form of human adaptation is choosing to face threats on behalf of others rather than simply surviving them. That's not evolutionary psychology. That's something else entirely. Thank you for the correction. I kept the letter because it reminded me of something important. Intelligence without wisdom is dangerous, but wisdom without courage is useless. Dr. Veras had intelligence, but he'd lost his way by forgetting that the point of human evolution isn't to create superior individuals. It's to create people who use their abilities to lift others up. My name is Miguel Silva, and I spent 7 years as a forest ranger before I learned that the most important thing you can track isn't signs of where something has been, but signs of where it's going. And the most dangerous predator isn't the one that hunts for survival, but the one that hunts to prove a point. The forest taught me how to read the land. Dr. Veras taught me how to read myself. But it took both lessons to understand that neither skill matters unless you use them to help others find their way home. My name is Marcos, and I used to be a forest ranger. 7 years protecting the Carajás National Forest in Pará, Brazil, before I learned that some predators walk on 2 legs and think with the cold precision of a scalpel. What happened 3 months ago changed everything I believed about the jungle, about evil, and about the thin line between civilization and savagery. I should have known something was wrong the moment I woke up that morning. The birds were silent. October 23rd, 5:47 a.m. My internal clock never failed me, even without an alarm. 7 years in the Amazon had taught my body to sync with the forest's rhythm. I rolled out of my hammock in the ranger station, feet hitting the wooden floor with practiced quiet. Through the window, I could see the last stars fading behind the canopy. In 2 hours, the search would officially begin for Dr. Ana Beatriz Santos, the biologist who'd missed her scheduled check-in. 36 hours overdue. In the Amazon, that was a lifetime. I pulled on my boots, checking the laces twice. Old habit. Your feet keep you alive out there, and nothing killed faster than a twisted ankle 50 kilometers from help. My gear hung exactly where I'd left it. GPS unit, satellite phone, first aid kit, machete, water purification tablets, emergency rations. I ran through the mental checklist my father had drilled into me as a boy. The forest provides everything, Marcos, but only if you bring your brain with you. The coffee was bitter and black, the way I'd learned to drink it. Fuel, nothing more. As I sipped, I reviewed Anna's file one more time. 31 years old, PhD in evolutionary biology from São Paulo University, specializing in nocturnal fauna adaptation. 5 years of Amazon experience. Not a novice who'd panic at the first snake or get lost following a bird call. Her planned route was ambitious but not reckless. A 3-day survey of the Tapajós tributary region, focusing on canopy-level mammals. She'd taken GPS coordinates every 4 hours like clockwork for the first day and a half, then nothing. Her last known position was grid reference 847239, near the old mining access road that hadn't been used in 6 years. I clipped the radio to my belt, tested the frequency. Base, this is Ranger 7, beginning search operation for Dr. Santos. Estimated return 1800 hours. Copy Ranger 7. Weather Service reports possible storm systems moving in from the northwest. Keep us posted. Storm systems. Perfect. I grabbed my rain gear and stepped into the morning mist. The forest greeted me like an old friend and potential enemy, which it was. 27 degrees Celsius, humidity at 90%, the air thick enough to drink. My boots squelched in the perpetually damp earth as I headed for the trail that would take me to Anna's last known coordinates. The scent of decay and growth mingled in my nostrils, the eternal Amazon perfume of life feeding on death. 15 minutes in, I stopped. The silence was wrong. Not complete silence. That would have been impossible here. But the pattern was off. Howler monkeys should have been warming up their territorial calls by now. The dawn chorus of birds should have been reaching its crescendo. Instead, I heard only the drip of condensation from leaves and the distant whisper of wind through the canopy. I knelt, examining the trail. Anna's boot prints were clear in the soft earth, size 7 hiking boots with a distinctive zigzag sole pattern. The impressions were deep and evenly spaced. She'd been walking at a steady pace, not running or stumbling. No signs of distress. But there was something else. 30 meters further along, I found the first anomaly. A branch broken at eye level, green wood exposed, the break fresh, maybe 12 hours old. Anna was 5'6" according to her file. This break was at 6 feet. Someone taller had passed this way recently. I activated my first real ability then, the one that had made me legendary among the other rangers. Exceptional tracking wasn't just about following footprints. It was about reading the story the forest told, which plants had been brushed against, how disturbed insects had relocated, the direction fallen leaves had been kicked. Most people saw chaos in the Amazon understory. I saw a library. 20 meters beyond the broken branch, I found a partial print in a patch of exposed soil. Not Anna's boot. This was larger, different tread pattern, and the impression was too shallow. Whoever made it was trying to step lightly, deliberately light. The print was positioned exactly where someone would step if they were following Anna's trail. My second ability kicked in automatically, nature reading. The forest was trying to tell me something. A troop of spider monkeys had moved through this area recently, all traveling in the same direction, away from Anna's trail. When primates abandon territory suddenly, it's usually because of predators, human predators. I stood slowly, every sense now hyper-alert. The feeling of being watched crawled up my spine like a living thing. I'd experienced this sensation 1,000 times in 7 years, usually from jaguars or caimans sizing me up. But this felt different, more focused, more intelligent. "Dr. Santos," I called out, my voice carrying perhaps 50 meters in the thick air. "Anna, this is Ranger Marcos. Can you hear me?" The forest swallowed my words and gave nothing back. I continued following her trail, now moving with the methodical care of someone who understood he might not be alone. Every few minutes, I found more evidence of the second set of tracks, always careful, always staying just off Anna's direct path. Professional stalking. By 9 a.m. I'd covered 3 kilometers and reached a small clearing where Anna had obviously stopped to take photographs. Her tripod marks were clear in the soft earth, positioned to capture the canopy gap where morning light filtered through. She'd spent at least 20 minutes here. I could tell from how her feet had shifted and pivoted as she worked. The stalker had waited too. His position was perfect, concealed behind a massive Brazil nut tree with clear sightlines to Anna and multiple escape routes. He'd crouched here for the entire time she worked, leaving knee impressions in the earth. That's when I found the first deliberate message. Carved into the bark of the Brazil nut tree at precisely my eye level was a single word: impressive. The letters were fresh, cut with something sharp and precise. A scalpel maybe, or a very good knife. The carving was positioned exactly where someone of my height would see it, if they discovered the stalker's hiding spot. This wasn't random. Someone knew I was coming. Someone had anticipated that I would find this trail, follow it and discover this exact spot. The message was meant for me specifically. I keyed my radio. "Base, Ranger 7. I'm at grid 847239. No sign of Dr. Santos, but I found evidence of a second party, requesting immediate backup and forensics team." Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. Nothing but white noise. That's when I noticed my GPS unit was showing error messages. Signal lost. The screen flickered between readings that couldn't be accurate. According to this, I was simultaneously in 3 different locations, all of them impossible. Someone with technical knowledge was jamming my equipment. My investigative intuition, the 4th ability, started connecting patterns that shouldn't have been possible. The broken branch at exactly 6 feet, the carved message at exactly my eye level, the equipment failure at precisely the moment I'd found evidence of foul play. This wasn't opportunistic, it was calculated. I was dealing with someone who had studied me. The realization hit like a physical blow. In 7 years of rescue operations, I'd never encountered a situation that felt planned around my specific abilities. Missing hikers got lost, injured, or killed by animals. They didn't vanish because of elaborate schemes designed to test particular forest rangers. Unless this wasn't about Anna at all. Unless she was bait. I backed away from the carved tree, suddenly aware that my position in the clearing made me visible from a dozen different angles. The forest felt different now, not sheltering but threatening, full of potential observation points and ambush positions. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong, the soft beep of electronic equipment coming from somewhere to my northwest. 3 short beeps, a pause, then 3 more, regular as a heartbeat. I moved toward the sound, machete in hand, using my natural orientation to navigate by instinct rather than the compromised GPS. This ability had saved me countless times, an internal compass that functioned regardless of equipment or visibility. Even in the thickest Amazon growth, even in complete darkness, I could sense true north and remember exactly how to return to any point I'd visited. The beeping led me through increasingly dense undergrowth until I reached a massive strangler fig that had consumed its host tree decades ago. The hollow interior was large enough for a person to stand comfortably, and someone had. Equipment covered every surface. Solar panels, battery packs, radio transmitters, and 3 different laptop computers running silent and deadly. Multiple screens displayed feeds from hidden cameras positioned throughout the forest. One screen showed Anna, alive but unconscious, secured in what looked like an underground shelter. Another screen showed my own approach to this very tree. I'd been watched every step of the way. A folded note sat on the central laptop, my name written on it, in the same precise handwriting as the tree carving. "Marcos," I read aloud, my voice barely a whisper. "Congratulations on finding my field office. Doctor, Santos is safe for now, though her continued well-being depends entirely on your performance in the next phase of our interaction. You have 1 hour to reach the coordinates programmed into the handheld GPS unit in this tree, the only electronic device that will function properly for you today. Come alone. Bring your considerable skills. Leave your radio and satellite phone here. They're compromised anyway. This isn't a rescue mission, Marcos. It's an examination." EM. The GPS unit sat exactly where promised. Coordinates already entered. 847-198. 5 kilometers northeast, in a section of forest I'd last visited 3 years ago during a research expedition with university botanists. But how could he know I'd been there? How could anyone know my movement history from 3 years ago unless my spatial memory, the 6th and most precise of my abilities, kicked in like a key turning in a lock? Grid 847-198. I could see that location as clearly as if I were standing there. A natural amphitheater formed by fallen giants, surrounded by dense growth that created perfect acoustic isolation. Dr. Eduardo Mendez had been part of that university expedition, the psychiatric consultant brought in to evaluate psychological stress factors in extended forest research. I remembered him now. Tall, maybe 6'2", soft-spoken but intensely intelligent. He'd asked detailed questions about my tracking abilities, seemed fascinated by how I navigated and read environmental signs. I'd demonstrated several techniques, proud to show off for someone who appeared genuinely interested in the science behind forest survival. He'd been studying me for 3 years. The second note waited underneath the GPS unit. "You're remembering now, aren't you? Good. It means your spatial memory is as exceptional as I theorized. Dr. Eduardo Mendez, in case you've forgotten the name. We worked together briefly. You taught me a great deal about reading the forest. Now I'd like to show you what I've learned about reading people. 1 hour, Marcos. The examination begins when you arrive." I pocketed the GPS and backed out of the strangler fig, mind racing. Mendez had been withdrawn during that expedition, I remembered now. Professional but distant. There'd been talk among the university team about some kind of personal tragedy, but I hadn't paid attention to gossip. What had happened to him in 3 years to turn a psychiatric consultant into this? The hike to 847-198 should have taken 90 minutes through normal forest. I made it in 55, using game trails and creek beds that wouldn't appear on any map. My natural orientation guided me through the most efficient route, while my nature reading kept me alert to environmental changes. The forest was still wrong. Animals continued their exodus from this sector, and the air felt electrically charged despite the clear sky. Even the insects seemed agitated, their usual patterns disrupted. As I approached the natural amphitheater, my ability to detect human presence went into overdrive. Someone was definitely there, but the sensation felt controlled, as if he wanted me to sense him but was managing how much of his presence leaked through. I crested the small ridge that led down into the amphitheater and saw him. Dr. Eduardo Mendez sat calmly on a fallen log in the center of the clearing, hands folded in his lap, looking exactly as I remembered except for his eyes. 3 years ago, they'd been intense but warm. Now they were the flat, evaluative eyes of a predator. 55 minutes, he said, without looking at his watch. Impressive, but not unexpected. Your route efficiency is remarkable. Please sit. He gestured to another log positioned about 10 feet away. I remained standing, machete still in hand. Where's Anna? Safe, for now. Please sit, Marcos. We have a great deal to discuss, and I'd prefer to do it civilly. Civilly? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've kidnapped a research scientist and lured me into the middle of nowhere. Nothing about this is civil. Mendez tilted his head, considering. You're quite right, of course. My methods are unconventional, but necessary for proper examination conditions. You see, I've spent 3 years studying your abilities, Marcos, tracking your rescue missions, analyzing your success patterns, even hiring local guides to test your reputation. You're genuinely extraordinary. Examination for what? Evolution, he said simply. The correction of fundamental errors in how society selects for survival. He stood slowly, hands visible and empty. Even so, every instinct I had screamed danger. This was a man who moved like water, precise and fluid, and absolutely in control of his environment. 3 years ago, I had a family, Mendez continued, his voice conversational but carrying perfectly in the natural acoustics of the amphitheater. Maria, my wife, 7 years married. Carmen, my daughter, 4 years old, bright as starlight. They were my world, Marcos. Everything I worked for, everything I believed in. He began walking slowly around the perimeter of the clearing, maintaining distance but staying visible. Then one evening, they went to the market. Wrong place, wrong time. 2 men decided to rob the jewelry store next door. Maria and Carmen were collateral damage. Maria died protecting Carmen. Carmen died in the hospital 3 days later. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the forest temperature. I'm sorry for your loss, but the interesting part, Mendez interrupted, is what happened next. The judicial system I'd served for 15 years as a forensic expert failed utterly. The criminals were released on procedural technicalities, insufficient evidence, contaminated crime scene, legal technicalities protecting the guilty while my family was simply gone. He stopped walking and fixed me with those predator eyes. That's when I realized the fundamental flaw in human civilization, Marcos. We protect the weak, the stupid, the careless. We punish the capable, the intelligent, the strong. Society has reversed natural selection. We're breeding weakness and calling it compassion. So you became a killer. I became evolution's correction, he said calmly. I select for superior traits, intelligence, survival skills, adaptability. People like you, Marcos. People worth preserving. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The missing researchers over the past 2 years, Dr. Hoffman from the Geology Survey, Professor Santos from the Archaeological Expedition, Dr. Rios from the Climate Study, all exceptional individuals, all tested thoroughly before selection. You killed them. I evaluated them. Some passed, some failed. The failures proved they weren't as exceptional as their reputations suggested. And Anna. Dr. Santos is pending. Her evaluation depends entirely on yours. Mendez reached into his jacket and withdrew something that looked like a tablet computer. The screen showed Anna, definitely alive, secured in what appeared to be an underground chamber with adequate lighting, water, and air circulation. She's safe and comfortable. How long she remains so depends on how well you perform in your evaluation. I gripped my machete tighter. What kind of evaluation? A hunt, of course, the most fundamental test of survival capability. He pressed something on the tablet. The image of Anna was replaced by a digital map of the surrounding forest area, roughly 10 square kilometers. A red dot showed my current position. A blue dot, about 2 kilometers east, was moving slowly. That blue dot represents your prey, Marcos. A man with survival training, equipment, and a 12-hour head start. Your task is to track him down and eliminate him. You have until sunset, about 8 hours. I'm not a killer. No? You've never killed to protect others, to defend yourself? Never had to put down a wounded animal to end its suffering? I had, of course. Jaguars threatening villages, caimans that had tasted human blood, venomous snakes too close to research camps. But those were animals, not... This is different. Is it? The man you're hunting killed a family of 4 last month. Torture, rape, murder. Children, Marcos. The authorities know who he is but can't prosecute due to lack of evidence. He's currently planning his next attack. Mendez tapped the tablet again. Crime scene photos appeared. A family destroyed. Children. Society failed these people just as it failed my family. You have the opportunity to correct that failure. Even if what you're saying is true, I won't murder someone for your entertainment. Not entertainment, education. You see, I believe you represent the next stage of human evolution, Marcos. Your abilities aren't just impressive, they're genuinely superhuman. Tracking skills that border on telepathy. Environmental awareness that exceeds any technology. You're what humans could become if we stopped protecting weakness and started selecting for strength. He gestured to the forest around us. But are you capable of the final requirement? Can you kill when killing serves justice? Can you eliminate threats that society is too weak to handle? And if I refuse? Dr. Santos dies, slowly and unpleasantly, and you return to your comfortable life knowing you could have saved her, but chose philosophical purity over practical action. The tablet screen shifted again, showing a timer. U7 post 5847, and counting down. Your prey is well-trained, well-equipped, and has intimate knowledge of this forest. He knows you're coming. This won't be easy, even for someone with your abilities. I stared at the screen, watching the blue dot move through digital representations of terrain I knew intimately. Every instinct I had told me this was wrong, that I was being manipulated by a madman. But Anna's life hung in the balance, and somewhere out there was a man who might or might not be a child killer. How do I know you're telling the truth about any of this? You don't. That's part of the evaluation. Can you make life or death decisions with incomplete information? Can you act on probability rather than certainty? He set the tablet on the fallen log where he'd been sitting. The tablet will track your progress and maintain communication with Dr. Santos's holding area. If the blue dot stops moving permanently, she goes free. If the timer reaches 0, she dies. Simple parameters. Mendez walked to the edge of the amphitheater, then turned back. I'll be watching, of course, documenting your methods, analyzing your decision-making process. This represents 3 years of preparation, Marcos. Don't disappoint me. He melted into the forest with the fluid silence of someone who'd learned to move like a predator. I stood alone in the amphitheater, staring at the tablet that held Anna's life in its digital hands. 7 hours and 53 minutes. The blue dot was still moving east. I picked up the tablet and began to track a killer. The hunt began like every hunt, with understanding the prey. According to the tablet's information panel, my target was designated Subject 7, male, age 34, former military with jungle warfare training. No name, but extensive behavioral analysis. He was smart, paranoid, and absolutely ruthless. Most importantly, he knew I was coming. I studied his movement pattern on the digital map. He was following creek beds and game trails, avoiding areas where tracking would be easy. Professional techniques, but he was moving too fast, prioritizing distance over stealth. A mistake. In dense forest, speed meant noise, broken vegetation, and clear trail signs. I activated all 6 abilities simultaneously, something I'd never attempted before. The cognitive load was enormous, but Anna's life demanded maximum performance. My exceptional tracking picked up his trail within 30 minutes. Boot prints in soft earth by a creek crossing, disturbed vegetation where he'd pushed through thick growth, even scent traces, soap, deodorant, the metallic smell of fear sweat. Nature reading told me he'd spooked wildlife along his route. Birds were agitated, monkeys had abandoned territories, and the insect patterns were wrong. He was moving like a bulldozer through an ecosystem that demanded subtlety. My human presence detection confirmed what I'd suspected. He was no longer moving away. The sensation of being hunted had shifted. Subject 7 had stopped running and started preparing an ambush. I stopped immediately, crouching behind a massive Cecropia tree, and activated my investigative intuition. If I were a former soldier with jungle training, being hunted by a forest ranger with legendary tracking abilities, what would I do? The answer came like a lightning strike. I'd find a defensive position with clear sight lines, multiple escape routes, and natural cover. Then I'd wait for my pursuer to walk into prepared killing ground. According to the tablet map, there were 3 such positions along his route: a rocky outcropping with caves, a cleared area around a fallen giant, and a creek confluence with excellent visibility. My spatial memory provided exact details of all 3 locations from previous visits. The rocky outcropping had too many blind spots, easy to approach unseen. The creek confluence was too open, no cover for sustained observation, but the fallen giant, perfect sniper position. One massive tree trunk providing cover, with clear views in all directions. Elevated position for shooting down at approaching targets. Multiple escape routes through dense forest. I had to assume he'd reached the fallen giant and was waiting. The question was, did I walk into his trap, or create one of my own? I studied the tablet's topographical display and smiled grimly. There was a third option. Using my natural orientation ability, I plotted a route that would bring me to the fallen giant from the north, a direction that should be impossible given the terrain. Dense growth, steep ravines, and a creek that couldn't be crossed safely. Except, I knew something Subject 7 didn't. 3 years ago, a massive Brazil nut tree had fallen across that creek, creating a natural bridge invisible from ground level. The fallen tree was still there according to my spatial memory, camouflaged by 3 seasons of growth, but solid enough to support human weight. I could approach his position from an angle he couldn't possibly expect. The route took 2 hours of careful movement through some of the most difficult terrain in the forest. I crossed the natural bridge exactly where I remembered it, then climbed the steep ravine using roots and rock holds that had been invisible from the bottom. My human presence detection went active as I neared the fallen giant. He was definitely there, maybe 60 meters away, focused on watching the southern approaches. I moved like water, like wind, like something that belonged in this forest so completely that the ecosystem itself helped hide me. Birds didn't startle as I passed. Insects continued their normal patterns. Even the monkeys ignored me. Subject 7 never saw me coming. I found him exactly where I'd predicted, lying prone behind the massive trunk with a rifle positioned to cover the southern approach routes. Military-grade weapon, probably semi-automatic, definitely capable of killing at considerable range. From my position 30 meters behind and above him, I could see everything. His equipment, his firing positions, his escape routes, everything except his face. This was the moment of truth. Did I believe Mendez's story about child murders and judicial failures? Did I trust a madman's evaluation of justice, or did I find another way? I keyed the tablet's communication function. "Mendez, I'm in position." His voice came through the speaker immediately, as if he'd been waiting. "Excellent time, Marcos. 5 hours, 12 minutes. Your approach route was ingenious. I didn't anticipate the northern ravine option. I want to talk to him first." "Talk to whom?" "Subject 7. If he's really what you say he is, I'll know." "How?" 7 years of dealing with people in crisis. You learn to read truth." There was a pause. Then, "Very well. But remember, Dr. Santos has 4 hours and 37 minutes remaining." I called out to the man below me. "Subject 7, my name is Marcos. I'm a forest ranger. Put down your weapon and turn around slowly." He spun instantly, rifle tracking toward my voice, but I was already moving to a new position. Fast reflexes, good training, but he was thinking like a soldier instead of like forest prey. "Who sent you?" he shouted in accented Portuguese. "You're not military." "Someone who believes you killed a family last month. Children." The rifle barrel dropped slightly. "Children? I never..." His voice carried genuine confusion and horror. "What family? What are you talking about?" I activated every ability I had to read his response. Body language, vocal stress, environmental reactions. Everything indicated he was telling the truth. 4 people, I called back. Parents and 2 children, tortured and murdered. Jesus Christ, no, I would never. I don't hurt children, ever. The anguish in his voice was real. Who told you this? Who sent you? My investigative intuition was screaming that something was wrong. This man's responses didn't match Mendez's description. Fear? Yes. Desperation? Yes. But not the coldness of a child killer. I keyed the tablet. Mendez, his responses don't match your profile. Of course they don't. He's a skilled liar and manipulator. That's how he's avoided prosecution. I don't think he's lying. 4 hours and 28 minutes, Marcos. I called down to subject 7 again. What's your real name? Carlos Montenegro. I was a federal police investigator, narcotics division. Was? Someone's trying to kill me. My whole team was eliminated 3 months ago. I'm the only one left. My blood ran cold. Eliminated how? Elaborate setups, made to look like accidents, suicides, natural causes. But all of us had been investigating the same case, the same person. What case? A psychiatric consultant who'd been hiring criminals for private contracts, someone with federal access, someone who understood police procedures well enough to stay ahead of investigations. The pieces were falling together like an avalanche. Dr. Eduardo Mendez, I whispered. You know him? Carlos's voice shot up an octave. Jesus, are you working for him? I keyed the tablet. Mendez, you lying bastard. He's not a child killer. He's a federal investigator. Mendez's laugh came through the speaker, genuinely amused. Very good, Marcos. I was beginning to worry you might actually kill an innocent man. This was all a test. Of course, I needed to know if you could think independently under pressure, if you could read people accurately even in crisis situations. You passed brilliantly. And Anna? Perfectly safe. She's been safe all along. The underground chamber is simply a research facility. Quite comfortable, actually. I stared at the tablet in disbelief. You son of a bitch. You manipulated everything. I optimized conditions for evaluation. There's a difference. Carlos had climbed to his feet below me, rifle still ready but no longer aimed. Are you going to kill me or not? Nobody's killing anybody, I called back. Then to the tablet. Mendez, this is over. I'm bringing Carlos and Anna back to the station, and then I'm calling in federal backup. I'm afraid that's not possible. The tablet screen shifted, showing a new image. Anna's holding area, but now with additional equipment visible. Sophisticated electronic devices with wires leading into the walls. You see, Marcos, I lied about Dr. Santos being safe. She's quite real peril now. Those devices you're seeing are explosive charges, enough to collapse her chamber completely. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. You're insane. I'm thorough. You have a choice to make. Kill Carlos Montenegro and prove you can make the hard decisions evolution demands, or refuse and watch Dr. Santos die for your philosophical purity. There has to be another way. There is. Come to me directly. Grid reference 847-156. Come alone, leave Montenegro alive, and we'll discuss terms for Dr. Santos's release. New coordinates appeared on the map, 3 kilometers west, in a section of forest I'd never seen before. 1 hour, Marcos, and bring the tablet. I'll need to monitor your approach. The transmission cut off. I looked down at Carlos, who was staring up at me with the expression of a man who'd been through too much to feel surprise anymore. Let me guess, he said. More complications? He wants me to come to him, alone. And you're going to do it. I don't have a choice. He's got Anna rigged with explosives. Carlos slung his rifle over his shoulder and began climbing toward my position. Then you're not going alone. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. Mendez killed my entire team, my partner, my friends. If he's finally making mistakes, I want to be there when he falls. He reached my position and extended his hand. Carlos Montenegro, Federal Police, and you're the legendary Ranger Marcos I've been hearing about for 3 years. I shook his hand. How did you know? Mendez has been obsessed with you. My investigation turned up surveillance files, behavioral analyses, even psychological profiles. You're his holy grail, Marcos. The perfect example of evolved human capability. Perfect enough to die for? Perfect enough to recruit. I think he's planning to offer you a partnership. We began moving toward the new coordinates, Carlos matching my pace with impressive skill. His jungle training was evident in every step. What exactly did your team discover about Mendes? That he's not just selecting victims randomly. He's building something. A network of exceptional individuals who've agreed to work for him. The missing researchers who passed his evaluations. They're not dead. They're recruited. Specialists in various fields, all with superior capabilities, all convinced that society has failed and needs correction. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He's creating his own organization, his own evolution project. Exactly. And you're the final piece. The ultimate predator. Someone who can track, hunt, and kill better than anyone he's ever encountered. We moved through the forest at maximum sustainable pace, guided by my natural orientation and Carlos's tactical knowledge. The combination was formidable. I could navigate any terrain, while he could spot potential threats and ambush points. How many? I asked as we crossed a small stream. How many what? How many people has he recruited? At least 12 that we could identify, probably more. Specialists in technology, psychology, surveillance, logistics, all brilliant. All convinced they're saving humanity, and all willing to kill for him. That's the beauty of his system. He doesn't ask them to kill randomly. He gives them targets who genuinely deserve it. Corrupt politicians, child molesters, war criminals who've escaped justice. Each recruitment is surrounded by unquestionably righteous kills. Until you're in too deep to say no. Exactly. The forest around us was changing as we approached the coordinates. More open, with signs of recent human activity. Paths had been cut through dense growth, equipment cached in waterproof containers, and the entire area felt managed. This is his base, Carlos said unnecessarily. How big an operation do you think he's running? My human presence detection was going wild. Multiple people, sophisticated equipment, and a sense of organized activity that felt like a military installation. Big enough to matter, I said. We crested a small ridge and saw it. The operation was hidden in a natural depression, camouflaged by carefully maintained forest cover, but extensive underneath. Solar panels powered multiple structures built into the landscape. Communication equipment, laboratories, living quarters, and what looked like training facilities, and people. At least 8 individuals moving with purpose and coordination through the facility. Mendes had built his own private army. Jesus, Carlos whispered, this is a full-scale operation, and I just walked into the middle of it with a tablet that's been tracking my every move. As if summoned by my words, Mendes appeared on the ridge opposite us, flanked by 2 armed individuals in forest camouflage. Welcome to the future, Marcos. His voice carried clearly across the depression. The next stage of human evolution, built by people who refuse to accept society's failures. He gestured to the facility below. 12 brilliant individuals, each exceptional in their field, each dedicated to correcting the fundamental flaws in human civilization. They've seen what you can do, Marcos. They want you to join us. And Anna? Safe and comfortable in Laboratory 3. Would you like to see her? One of his armed companions held up a tablet showing a live feed. Anna sat in what looked like a well-equipped research facility, unbound and apparently unharmed. No explosive devices were visible. You lied about the bombs. I optimized motivation. Sometimes truth is less persuasive than strategic fiction. Carlos stirred beside me. Permission to shoot this bastard. Denied. There are too many of them, and we still need to get Anna out safely. Then what's your plan? I activated my spatial memory, reviewing every detail of the facility layout I could observe. Multiple buildings, numerous personnel, sophisticated equipment, but also something else. Something that didn't fit the pattern. Mendes, I called across the depression. This is impressive, but it's also illegal. Federal police have been investigating you for months. Federal police are irrelevant. Their authority comes from the same failed system we're working to replace. Maybe, but they have resources you don't. Satellites, air support, special operations teams. all of which would be useless if they don't know where to find us. They know, Carlos said loudly enough for everyone to hear. My last transmission included GPS coordinates. Federal response teams are en route. It was a bluff, but a good one. I could see uncertainty ripple through Mendez's companions. Even if that were true, Mendez said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence, it would simply mean we need to accelerate our timeline. Or abandon this facility and disappear into the forest, I called back. Leave Anna and walk away. You've got 12 people, sophisticated equipment, and 3 years of planning. Cut your losses. And give up the opportunity to recruit the most capable predator I've ever encountered. I think not. He gestured, and his armed companions began moving down into the facility, flanking maneuvers. Last chance, Marcos. Join us willingly, or we'll collect you by force. That's when I realized my mistake. I'd been thinking of this as a negotiation when it was actually a trap. Mendez had never intended to let any of us leave. He'd lured me here to complete his recruitment by force, but he'd also made a crucial error. He'd revealed the full scope of his operation, shown me his personnel and resources, demonstrated his capabilities, information I could use against him. If I could get close enough. Carlos, I whispered, can you create a distraction? What kind of distraction? Something that draws their attention away from the laboratory buildings. I can do better than that. I can create chaos. He reached into his pack and withdrew what looked like a standard emergency flare, except the markings were wrong. Military-grade smoke and flash, he explained, designed for jungle operations. This will light up the forest for half a kilometer and create enough smoke to hide an army. How many do you have? 3. Plus standard fragmentation grenades if things get really interesting. I studied the facility layout one more time, memorizing every detail. Here's what we're going to do. The plan was simple and desperate, which meant it had a chance of working. Carlos would position himself on the eastern ridge and deploy smoke grenades to create a massive concealment cloud. In the chaos, I would descend into the facility using my abilities to locate and extract Anna. Once she was secure, Carlos would call in actual federal backup while I dealt with Mendez. And if the plan goes to hell, Carlos asked, then we improvise and try not to die. Outstanding. I love working with optimists. We moved into position, Carlos ghosting along the ridgeline while I descended toward the facility's northern edge. My human presence detection tracked multiple individuals moving through the complex, but their attention was focused on the southern approaches where they expected trouble. Carlos's first smoke grenade detonated exactly on schedule, blooming into a massive cloud of dense white smoke that rolled across the facility like fog. Shouts erupted from multiple positions as Mendez's people tried to reorient to this new threat. I moved through the smoke like a shadow, using my natural orientation to navigate by instinct while everyone else was effectively blind. My exceptional tracking led me directly to Laboratory 3, where Anna's signal had originated. The building was larger than it had appeared from the ridge, built into the hillside with multiple rooms and sophisticated equipment. I found Anna in the central laboratory, unrestrained but obviously shaken. Marcos! She jumped up from a chair where she'd been reading. Thank God, how did you find me? Long story, are you hurt? No, just confused and scared. That man, Mendez, he kept asking questions about my research, about evolutionary adaptation patterns. I think he's completely insane. You're not wrong, we need to leave now. I led her toward the laboratory exit, but stopped when my human presence detection screamed danger. Someone was approaching fast, and they weren't trying to hide. Mendez appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed companions. No longer the controlled intellectual predator from our earlier encounters. The smoke and chaos had stripped away his calm facade, revealing something desperate and furious underneath. You're making a serious mistake, Marcos, he said, raising what looked like a tranquilizer gun. I've invested too much time and resources to let you simply walk away. It's over, Mendez. Federal police are en route, your facility is compromised, and your people are scattered. My people are regrouping. Federal police are irrelevant, and you're coming with us, whether you cooperate or not. He aimed the tranquilizer gun at Anna. Dr. Santos will ensure your cooperation. That's when Carlos's second smoke grenade detonated, this one much closer to the laboratory. Dense white smoke poured through the doorway, and I moved. My abilities activated simultaneously in a way I'd never experienced before. Exceptional tracking let me navigate perfectly through zero visibility. Nature reading told me exactly where each person was positioned based on their breathing and movement patterns. Human presence detection gave me precise locations for all threats. Investigative intuition showed me the optimal path to neutralize Mendez without endangering Anna. I moved like something that belonged in this forest so completely that I became part of the ecosystem itself. Mendez never saw me coming. I hit him from the side, driving him into the wall with enough force to knock the tranquilizer gun from his hands. His companions tried to react, but they were firing blind into smoke while I could see everything. "Anna, stay down," I shouted, then engaged the nearest gunman with techniques my father had taught me for dealing with jaguars. Fast, decisive, and absolutely without mercy. The fight lasted perhaps 30 seconds. When the smoke began to clear, Mendez was unconscious against the laboratory wall. His two companions were disarmed and disabled, and Anna was safe. Carlos appeared in the doorway, rifle ready. Federal backup is actually en route now. Real federal backup, not just my bluff from earlier. How? Emergency beacon in my pack. Been broadcasting our location for the past hour. I could hear helicopters in the distance, growing closer. What about the rest of Mendez's people? Scattered when the smoke started. They're well-trained, but not military. When things went chaotic, they prioritized escape over engagement. Mendez was beginning to stir, blood trickling from a head wound, but conscious. His eyes focused on me with the same predator intensity, but now mixed with something that might have been respect. "You really are exceptional," he said, his voice thick but clear. "Everything I theorized and more." "Your theory was wrong from the beginning, Mendez. Evolution isn't about predators eliminating the weak. It's about adaptation, cooperation, building something better together." Naive idealism. Society protects failure and punishes excellence. Society protects potential and punishes predation. There's a difference. The helicopters were close now, the sound echoing through the forest canopy. "This isn't over, Marcos. Others will continue the work. The correction of evolution is inevitable." "Maybe, but not today." Carlos zip-tied Mendez's hands while I helped Anna to her feet. She was shaky but unharmed, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made her reputation as a researcher. "Thank you," she said simply. "Both of you." "Just doing our job," Carlos replied, though I have to admit this was more excitement than most investigations provide. Federal forces secured the facility over the next 4 hours, recovering extensive evidence of Mendez's operation and identifying locations where his recruited specialists might be hiding. The investigation would continue for months, but the immediate threat was neutralized. As the sun set through the forest canopy, I found myself sitting by the stream where this had all begun, reflecting on everything that had happened. Anna joined me, having finished her debriefing with the federal agents. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Mendez claimed you had abilities that bordered on superhuman, enhanced tracking, environmental awareness, things like that. How much of that was true?" I considered the question carefully. "I'm good at what I do. 7 years in the Amazon teaches you things that can't be learned in any school. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I have. I read the forest the way other people read books. I navigate by instinct the way other people use GPS. I can track things that most people would miss completely. Those are remarkable abilities. They're survival skills. Nothing more, nothing less." She was quiet for a moment, listening to the evening sounds of the forest returning to normal after the day's chaos. "Do you think he was completely wrong?" she asked eventually. "About evolution? About society protecting weakness?" "I think he confused strength with predation. Real strength builds things, protects things, makes things better. Predation just destroys. And what if society really is failing? What if the systems we depend on can't protect people who need protection?" I thought about Carlos and his murdered team, about the family Mendez had lost, about all the ways civilization could break down and leave people vulnerable. Then we fix the systems. We don't replace them with something worse. The helicopters had long since departed. taking Mendez and the evidence back to federal facilities. Carlos had gone with them, but not before shaking my hand and promising to stay in touch. Anna and I would hike back to the ranger station in the morning, returning to our normal lives and trying to process everything that had happened. But something had changed in those hours of crisis. I'd discovered capabilities I hadn't known I possessed, pushed my abilities beyond anything I'd thought possible. Mendez had been wrong about evolution, but not entirely wrong about potential. The question was what to do with that knowledge. As stars appeared through the forest canopy, I made a decision. I would continue being a forest ranger, continue protecting people who ventured into places they didn't fully understand. But I would also remember what I'd learned about myself, about the difference between strength and predation, about the responsibility that comes with exceptional abilities. The forest had taught me everything I needed to know about survival. Mendez had taught me everything I needed to know about the difference between surviving and living. I chose living. My name is Marcos, and I used to be just a forest ranger. Now I'm something more. Not because I've become a predator, but because I've learned to use my abilities to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than hunt. Mendez was right about one thing. Evolution never stops. We're all becoming something new, something better, something stronger. The question is what we choose to become. I choose to become someone who makes the forest and the world a little safer for everyone who enters it. That's the only evolution that matters.